The shotgun blast tore through the Texas night, and 19-year-old Mara Lane didn't flinch. She'd stopped fearing her father's rage years ago. Now she only feared what would happen to the four small bodies pressed against her back when she was gone. Blood trickled from her split lip as her mother's whiskey-soaked curse cut deeper than any blow. Should have drowned you with the rest of the worthless pups. That's when Mara understood. She would die in this shack, or she would kill the name Lane forever. One way or another tonight, someone was getting buried. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far Mara's journey travels. The shack groaned in the wind like something dying, which Mara supposed it was. Everything in Claymore County, Texas, seemed to be dying in the summer of 1873. The crops, the cattle, the hope, especially the hope. She pressed her back against the splintered wall, feeling the rough wood dig into her shoulder blades through the threadbare cotton of her dress. Her four siblings huddled in the corner she'd made for them from old feed sacks and moth-eaten blankets. Tommy, 8 years old with their father's dark hair but none of his cruelty. The twins, Sarah and Samuel, barely 6, their faces still round with the last remnants of childhood. And little Beth, just 4, who hadn't spoken a word since their mother had locked her in the root cellar for 2 days last winter as punishment for crying. The punishment had been Mara's fault, of course. Everything was always Mara's fault. "You hear me, girl?" Her father's voice came from somewhere beyond the door, thick with the whiskey he'd traded their last hen for. "You think you can steal from me? You think you can take food meant for my mouth and give it to these little bastards?" Mara had given Tommy half her portion that morning. Tommy, who'd been so thin lately that his ribs showed through his shirt like the slats of a broken fence. Her father had noticed. Her father always noticed when she tried to save them. "Robert, leave it." Her mother's voice was different from her father's drunk. Hers was cold sober and twice as cruel. "Let the bitch starve. Maybe she'll finally do us the favor of dying." The door crashed open. Her father filled the frame, swaying slightly, the shotgun loose in his grip. He wasn't going to shoot her. Mara knew that much. He needed her alive to work, to take the blame, to absorb the blows meant for the others. But knowing didn't stop her heart from hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Get out here." Mara stood slowly, carefully, the way you'd move around a rattlesnake. "Pa, I said, get out here." She moved toward the door, placing herself between him and the children, always between him and the children. Behind her, she heard Tommy's sharp intake of breath, felt Sarah reach for her skirt. "Don't," Mara whispered back to them. "Stay quiet." Her father grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the bruises already there, layers of pain upon pain like sediment in a riverbed. He dragged her into the main room where her mother sat at the table, a half-empty bottle before her, her face pinched with perpetual disappointment. Eleanor Lane had been beautiful once, or so the fading daguerreotype on the mantel suggested. But 19 years of hardship, 5 surviving children, and 3 buried in the hard Texas ground had carved that beauty into something sharp and bitter. She looked at Mara the way you'd look at a coyote that kept killing your chickens, with cold calculation about when and how to put it down. "You know what you cost us?" her mother said, not quite slurring, but close. "Every mouthful you take, every thread on your back, every breath of air in this house." "I work," Mara said, keeping her voice level. "I work the garden. I tend the—" The slap came from her father, open-handed but hard enough to snap her head to the side. Stars burst across her vision. "You work what we tell you to work. You eat what we allow you to eat. And you sure as hell don't steal from your own blood to feed—" He gestured vaguely toward the room where the children hid. "Them." "They're your blood too," Mara said before she could stop herself. Her mother laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Are they? Are you sure about that, Mara? Because I look at you, at your dark hair and your sharp face, and I wonder whose bastard you really are. Your father was gone for 3 months in '54, you know. Working the railroad, he said. And I was here, alone, with a neighbor who had kind eyes and skilled hands." It was an old accusation, one her mother pulled out whenever she wanted to justify her particular brand of hatred. Whether it was true or not didn't matter. Eleanor Lane had decided long ago that Mara was the root of every misfortune, and no amount of proof would convince her otherwise. I don't care, Mara said quietly. The words surprised even her. I don't care whose blood runs in me. Her father's fist connected with her ribs. She folded around the pain, gasping, tasting blood from where she'd bitten her tongue. You should care, he growled. You should care that you wear my name, that you live under my roof, that every scrap of food in your ungrateful mouth is mine to give or take away. Mara straightened slowly, one hand pressed to her side. The pain was bright and sharp, but she'd learned long ago how to breathe through it, how to stand when everything in her body screamed to curl up and surrender. Then take it, she said. Her father blinked. What? Take it all. The name, the roof, the food. Mara met her mother's eyes, then her father's. I don't want it anymore. The silence that followed was so complete that Mara could hear the wind whistling through the gaps in the walls, the skitter of a mouse in the corner, the rapid beating of her own heart. You ungrateful, her mother started. I'm grateful for nothing, Mara interrupted, and there was a freedom in saying it out loud, in finally giving voice to the truth that had been building in her chest for years. You gave me life, and then spent every day since making me wish you hadn't. You gave me a name and then made it a curse, so keep it. I don't want to be Elaine anymore. Her father raised the shotgun, pointing it at her chest. His hands were shaking, with rage or whiskey, Mara couldn't tell. You'll be whatever I say you are. No. The word was soft but absolute. I won't. Robert. Her mother stood, placing one hand on the gun barrel, pushing it down. But the look in her eyes wasn't mercy. It was something colder, more calculated. Let her go. Her father stared. What? Let her go. Eleanor Lane smiled, and it was the cruelest expression Mara had ever seen on her face. Let her walk out that door with nothing but the clothes on her back. Let her see how far she gets in this world without a name, without a family, without anything. She wants to refuse us? Fine. Let her starve in a ditch somewhere. At least she won't be eating our food. The children, Mara started. We'll stay here, her mother finished. They're ours. You want to walk away from the Lane name? You walk away from everything that comes with it. Mara's heart stopped. In all her fantasies of escape, she'd never imagined leaving without them. Tommy, Sarah, Samuel, Beth. They were the only reason she'd survived this long, the only lights in her darkness. I'll take them, Mara said. I'll take them with me. Her father laughed, a harsh bark of sound. The hell you will. They're my property, same as this house, same as that dress you're wearing. You walk out that door, you walk alone. Mara looked toward the room where the children waited. She could hear Tommy's ragged breathing, could picture them huddled together in the dark, small and scared and needing her. I can't, she whispered. Then shut your mouth, her father said, and get back to work. But Mara didn't move. She stood in the center of that dying shack, surrounded by the ruins of her childhood, and felt something shift inside her. A door opening. A chain breaking. A choice crystallizing with perfect, terrible clarity. She could stay and watch them all die slowly, herself and the children, ground down by cruelty and neglect until there was nothing left but ghosts. Or she could leave, find work, find help, and come back strong enough to pull them out of this hell. I need time, she said. Her mother's laugh was sharp. Time for what? To figure out how to survive without you, to find work, to make enough money to... She stopped, knowing she couldn't admit her real plan. To come back for the brats, her father finished, seeing right through her. Not a chance. You leave. You leave for good. Then I guess I'm staying. Her father's eyes narrowed. You think I'm bluffing? You think I won't throw you out on your ass right now? I think you need me, Mara said, and there was a hardness in her voice she'd never heard before. I think without me to blame, you'd have to look at each other and admit that you're both drunken failures who can't even keep a roof from collapsing over your heads. I think you need me to hate so you don't have to hate yourselves. The blow came faster this time. Her father's fist caught her on the cheekbone, snapping her head back. She stumbled, caught herself on the table, tasted blood. Get out, he said. Get out before I kill you. Robert, her mother started. Get out! He grabbed Mara by the hair, dragging her toward the door. She didn't fight. Fighting would only make it worse, would only give him an excuse to hurt her more. He threw her into the dirt outside, and she landed hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. You come back, he called from the doorway, and I'll shoot you on sight. You hear me? The Lane name is dead to you, and you're dead to us. The door slammed. Mara lay in the dust, staring up at the purple Texas sky, and listened to the sound of her siblings crying inside. Tommy's voice rose above the others. Mara, Mara, please! She wanted to go to them. Every fiber of her being screamed to stand up, to break down that door, to gather them in her arms and run until her legs gave out. But her father had the gun, and her mother had the law on her side. Parents' rights, they called it. The right to own your children like livestock. So Mara lay in the dirt and made herself a promise. She would survive this night. She would find work, find money, find a way. And then she would come back for them, consequences be damned. They weren't Lanes. None of them were, not really. They were just children who'd been born into the wrong family, given the wrong name, just like her. The night was cool for Texas summer, but Mara shivered anyway. She had no coat, no shoes beyond the worn-out boots on her feet, no food, no water. The nearest town was Claymore, 5 miles south along a road that turned to mud when it rained and dust when it didn't. She'd never been there. Her parents rarely let her leave the property, but she'd heard the ranch hands talk about the saloon and the general store and the church where good people gathered on Sundays. Good people. Mara wondered what that meant, wondered if there was any such thing. She pushed herself up to sitting, wincing as her bruised ribs protested. In the distance, a coyote howled, and another answered. The sound made her think of her mother's words. Let her starve in a ditch somewhere. No, Mara said to the darkness. Not tonight. Not ever. She stood, swaying slightly, and looked back at the shack. It squatted against the horizon like a malignant growth, windows dark, smoke from the dying fire seeping through gaps in the walls. Somewhere inside, her siblings were crying themselves to sleep, wondering why she'd left them. I'll come back, she whispered. I promise. I'll come back. But promises, Mara knew, were cheap. Action was what mattered. Survival was what counted. She turned toward the road and started walking. The first 3 miles were easy. Mara had worked the garden, hauled water, chopped wood. Her body knew hard labor, knew how to push through pain and exhaustion. The road stretched before her in the moonlight, rutted and dry, flanked by scrub brush and the occasional twisted mesquite. Somewhere an owl hooted. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small drama of a girl with no name walking toward an uncertain future. The 4th mile was harder. Her ribs ached with every breath, and the split on her lip had reopened, blood trickling down her chin. She was thirsty, desperately thirsty, but there was no water until Claymore, and Claymore was still a mile away. The 5th mile nearly broke her. Her legs turned to lead, her vision blurred. She stumbled, caught herself, stumbled again. The sky was starting to lighten in the east, that deep blue that comes before dawn, and Mara realized she'd been walking all night. She needed to stop, needed to rest. But if she stopped, she might not start again. And if she didn't start again, she'd end up exactly where her mother predicted, starving in a ditch, another nameless casualty of a hard land and harder people. Not tonight, she said again, forcing one foot in front of the other. Not ever. The sun broke over the horizon just as Mara crested a low hill and saw Claymore spread before her. It wasn't much. A main street of packed dirt, maybe 20 buildings total, a church steeple rising above the rest like a finger pointing toward heaven. But to Mara, who'd spent 19 years in that collapsing shack, it looked like salvation. She half walked, half staggered down the hill into town. The streets were empty. It was too early for business, too late for drunks. Somewhere a rooster crowed. A dog barked. The smell of wood smoke and horses drifted on the morning air. Mara made it to the church steps before her legs finally gave out. She collapsed against the railing, gasping, every muscle screaming. Her vision swam. Her mouth tasted like copper and dust. Please, she whispered to no one in particular. Please, I just need... What did she need? Water, food, work, a reason to keep breathing, help. She needed help. But help, Mara had learned, rarely came to those who needed it most. The world wasn't built for charity. It was built for the strong, the wealthy, the ones with names that meant something. And Mara had just thrown her name away. She must have passed out, because the next thing she knew, someone was shaking her shoulder, calling her name. Except they couldn't call her name because she didn't have one anymore. Miss, can you hear me? Mara forced her eyes open. A woman's face swam into focus, middle-aged, weathered, with kind eyes and flour on her apron. Oh, you poor thing, the woman said. What happened to you? Mara tried to answer, but her throat was too dry. She managed a croak that might have been water. The woman, Mrs. Adkins, she'd later learn, the pastor's wife, disappeared and returned with a dipper of cold, clear water. Mara drank greedily, spilling as much as she swallowed, not caring about the waste because she'd never tasted anything so perfect in her entire life. Easy now, Mrs. Adkins said. Not too fast or you'll make yourself sick. That's it. Good girl. When the dipper was empty, Mara leaned back against the railing and closed her eyes. Do you have a name, child? Such a simple question. Such an impossible question. Mara, she finally said, because she couldn't bring herself to give up that much. Her mother had called her Mara, bitter in Hebrew, chosen because Eleanor Lane believed her firstborn had poisoned her life from the moment of conception. But Mara had decided to keep the name anyway, to take the bitterness her mother intended and transform it into something else. Survival, strength, steel. Just Mara. Just Mara, Mrs. Adkins repeated gently. And where are you from, just Mara? Mara opened her eyes and met the woman's gaze. Nowhere. I'm from nowhere. It wasn't exactly a lie. Mrs. Adkins studied her, the bruises, the split lip, the way Mara held herself like someone expecting the next blow. Whatever she saw in Mara's face made her nod slowly. I see, she said. Well, just Mara from nowhere. You look like you could use a hot meal and a safe place to sleep. My husband and I run the church here. We've got a spare room in the parsonage. You're welcome to it, no questions asked. Mara's eyes burned. She couldn't remember the last time someone had offered her something without expecting payment, punishment, or both. I can work, she said quickly. I'm strong. I can cook, clean, do laundry, whatever you need. I won't be a burden. Child, the only burden is carrying pain alone. Mrs. Adkins held out her hand. Come on, let's get you inside before the town wakes up and starts gossiping. Mara took the offered hand and let herself be pulled to her feet. Her legs shook, but she locked her knees and forced herself to stand straight. Thank you, she said, but I can only stay until I earn enough to... She stopped, not sure how to explain about her siblings, about the promise she'd made, about the desperate need to get back before her father's cruelty turned from words and fists to something worse. Until you figure out what comes next, Mrs. Adkins finished. I understand. One day at a time, just Mara. One day at a time. In fact, the parsonage was small but clean, with whitewashed walls and simple furniture that looked handmade but sturdy. Mrs. Adkins led Mara to a room barely bigger than a closet, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the church cemetery. It's not much, Mrs. Adkins said, but it's yours for as long as you need it. Mara stared at the bed, at the clean sheets, the thick quilt, the pillow that looked soft enough to sink into. At the shack she'd slept on the floor with the children, using her own body to keep them warm. I've never had a room before, she admitted. Mrs. Adkins' expression crumpled with sympathy, but she recovered quickly, bustling around to light the lamp and pull back the curtains. Well, you have one now. There's fresh water in the pitcher, and I'll bring you some bread and butter once you've had a chance to wash up. After you eat, you should sleep. We'll talk about work and such when you're rested. She left before Mara could thank her again, closing the door with a soft click. Alone, Mara moved to the washstand and caught sight of her reflection in the small mirror mounted above it. She barely recognized herself. The bruise on her cheekbone had blossomed into a vivid purple black. Her lip was swollen. Her hair hung in tangles around a face that looked older than 19, harder than it should be. But her eyes still held something, not hope exactly, more like determination, a refusal to break. She washed her face carefully, hissing as the water stung her split lip. She combed her hair with her fingers since she didn't have a brush. She straightened her dress as much as possible, though the fabric was so worn that it was hopeless. When Mrs. Adkins returned with food, Mara ate slowly, savoring every bite. The bread was fresh baked, the butter sweet and rich. It tasted like everything good she'd ever imagined. "Thank you," she said when the plate was empty. "You're welcome, child." Mrs. Adkins collected the dishes. "Now sleep. We'll talk when you wake." But after the woman left, Mara didn't sleep immediately. Instead, she knelt by the window and looked out at the cemetery, at all those names carved in stone. People who'd lived and died, been loved and mourned, remembered. People who'd mattered. "I'll matter too," Mara whispered to the graves. "I'll save them, and then I'll matter." Only then did she climb into bed, pulling the quilt up to her chin. The mattress was soft, the pillow softer. For the first time in her life, Mara Lane, no, just Mara, because she'd killed that name, buried it in the dust outside her father's shack, closed her eyes, and felt safe. Just before sleep claimed her, she thought of her siblings huddled in their corner, of Tommy trying to be brave, of the twins clinging to each other, of little Beth's silent tears. "I'm coming back," she promised the darkness. "I just need time. I just need to get strong enough. And then I'm coming back, and I'm taking you away from that place forever." The morning sun climbed higher, pouring through the window, warming the quilt, warming her. And Mara slept without nightmares for the first time in years, dreaming instead of a future where names didn't matter, where blood didn't matter, where all that mattered was showing up, doing the work, and refusing, absolutely refusing, to give up on the people you loved, even when everything in the world told you that you should. Mara woke to the sound of church bells and the smell of bacon frying. For a moment, disoriented in the unfamiliar softness of the bed, she thought she'd died and somehow ended up somewhere that didn't hurt. Then memory crashed back. The beating, the walk, the collapse on the church steps, and she sat up too quickly, her ribs screaming in protest. The sun was high. She'd slept through most of the day. Panic clawed at her throat. She'd wasted hours, precious hours she could have spent working, earning money, getting closer to the moment she could go back for her siblings. She threw off the quilt and stood, swaying slightly as blood rushed from her head. Her reflection in the mirror showed the same bruised face, but her eyes were clearer now, sharper, rested, even if her body still ached in a dozen places. A knock at the door made her jump. "Just Mara?" Mrs. Adkins' voice was gentle. "Are you awake?" "Yes, ma'am." Mara straightened, tried to smooth her dress, gave up. "I'm sorry I slept so long. I should be working. I should—" The door opened. Mrs. Adkins carried a tray with more food, eggs, bacon, biscuits, a cup of coffee that smelled like heaven. "You should be eating," the older woman said firmly, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "And then we'll talk about work, but not before." Mara wanted to argue, but her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. Mrs. Adkins smiled. "That's what I thought. Sit, eat. I'll be back in 20 minutes. She was gone before Mara could protest. Alone with the food, Mara ate more slowly this time, trying to make each bite last, trying not to think about Tommy and Sarah and Samuel and Beth, about whether they'd eaten today, about whether her father's rage had found a new target now that she was gone. The coffee was strong and bitter, nothing like the weak, overboiled stuff her mother made. Mara drank it anyway, feeling the warmth spread through her chest, the caffeine sharpening her thoughts. She was finishing the last biscuit when Mrs. Adkins returned, this time with a bundle under her arm. "I brought you some clothes," the woman said, setting the bundle on the bed. "They belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to San Antonio. They should fit well enough." Mara stared at the bundle, a simple brown dress, an apron, undergarments that looked clean and whole, a pair of sturdy boots that weren't held together with string and prayer. "I can't accept—" "You can, and you will," Mrs. Adkins said, brooking no argument. "Your dress is barely holding together, and those boots have more hole than sole. You can't work in those. Consider it an advance on your wages." "What wages?" Mrs. Adkins sat in the room's only chair, folding her hands in her lap. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about being strong, about being willing to work. The truth is, my husband and I aren't getting any younger, and running the church, the parsonage, the charity work, It's getting to be too much. We could use help. Someone to cook, clean, help with the Sunday gatherings, tend the church garden. It wouldn't pay much, but it would be honest work, and you'd have room and board included. Mara's mind raced, calculating. Room and board meant she wouldn't need to spend money on those necessities. Whatever wages Mrs. Adkins offered, she could save. And if she worked hard, proved herself valuable, maybe they'd pay her more. Maybe in a few months she'd have enough to rent a small place, somewhere she could take her siblings when she got them back. How much? She asked. $3 a week. $3. It wasn't much, barely enough to buy supplies for one person, let alone 5. But it was a start. I'll take it, Mara said. When do I start? Mrs. Adkins smiled. Tomorrow's soon enough. Today, you rest and heal. Change into those clothes, walk around town if you'd like, get your bearings. But Mara, the woman's expression turned serious. People will ask questions about where you're from, who your family is. What will you tell them? Mara had thought about this during the long walk, during the moments before sleep claimed her. She couldn't tell the truth. If word got back to her father about where she was, he might come for her, might hurt the Adkins for harboring his property. And she couldn't lie too elaborately, because lies had a way of unraveling. I'll tell them I'm from a farm east of here, that my parents died, that I'm alone. She met Mrs. Adkins' eyes. It's mostly true. The older woman nodded slowly. I won't pry, child. Everyone's entitled to their secrets. But if you ever need to talk, if you ever need help beyond what I can offer, you come to me or my husband. Understood? Yes, ma'am. After Mrs. Adkins left, Mara changed into the borrowed clothes. The dress fit reasonably well, only slightly loose in the shoulders and long in the hem. The boots were a miracle, real leather, barely worn, with laces that actually held. Mara laced them up and stood, marveling at how different it felt to have solid ground between her feet and the earth. She studied her reflection again. In the new dress, with her hair combed and her face clean despite the bruises, she looked almost respectable, almost like a girl with a future, almost like someone who mattered. She left the parsonage and stepped into the afternoon sun of Claymore, Texas. The main street was busier now, men on horseback, women with shopping baskets, children darting between buildings in some incomprehensible game. The general store was open, its windows displaying bolts of fabric and tools and glass jars of hard candy. Next door, the saloon's bat-wing doors swung as a cowboy stumbled out, already drunk despite the early hour. Mara walked slowly, taking it all in. The church where she'd collapsed, the livery stable, where the smell of horses and hay reminded her of the shack's barn back when they'd had animals worth keeping. The boarding house, where respectable women in traveling clothes sat on the porch, fanning themselves against the heat. And at the end of the street, standing apart from the other buildings like it preferred its own company, a ranch supply store with a sign that read, Carter and Sons. Something made Mara walk toward it. Curiosity, maybe, or the desire to understand this town that would be her home, at least for now. Through the window, she could see shelves of rope and saddles, barrels of nails and horseshoes, everything a working ranch might need. The door was open. Mara stepped inside, letting her eyes adjust to the dimmer interior. Help you? The voice came from behind the counter, an older man with silver hair and a weathered face that suggested a lifetime outdoors. Just looking, Mara said. I'm new in town. That's so? The man studied her with the frank assessment of someone used to judging livestock and finding most of it wanting. His gaze lingered on her bruised face, but he didn't comment. You got people here? I'm working for the Adkins, at the church. Ah, the man nodded. Good people, the Adkins. My wife and I attend their services regular. I'm William Carter, by the way. I run this place with my son. Carter. Mara filed the name away, though she wasn't sure why it seemed important. Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Carter. Just Carter's fine. He moved around the counter, his movements stiff in a way that suggested old injuries never quite healed. My son should be back shortly if you need anything specific. He handles most of the ranch orders these days. I mostly just keep the books and gossip with the customers. As if summoned by the mention, the door opened behind Mara. She turned and found herself looking at a man who made the word tall seem inadequate. He had to be 6'3" at least, with shoulders that suggested he could lift a horse if circumstances required. His face was shadowed by a worn hat, but Mara caught an impression of dark eyes, a strong jaw, and a general air of someone who'd learned early that the world was harsh and had decided to be harsher. "Flint," the older Carter said. "We got a new resident. She's working for the Adkins." The tall man, Flint, removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends and those dark eyes Mara had glimpsed. He looked at her with the same assessing gaze his father had used, but there was something different in it. Something that made Mara want to look away and hold his stare at the same time. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and rough, like gravel underfoot. "Sir?" Mara replied, keeping her own voice neutral. An awkward silence stretched between them. The elder Carter cleared his throat. "This is my son, Flint. Runs the Carter Ranch about 3 miles north of town. Best spread in the county, though I'm probably biased." "Second best," Flint corrected mildly, still looking at Mara. "The Morrison place has better water access." "Details." William Carter waved a dismissive hand, then to Mara. "You didn't mention your name, miss." "Mara," she said. Just Mara, she thought but didn't add. Just Mara from nowhere, working at the church, trying to save enough money to rescue 4 children from hell. "Well, Miss Mara, welcome to Claymore. It's not much, but it's home." The older man smiled. "You need anything at all, you come see us. We give a discount to church folk." "Thank you," Mara said. She risked another glance at Flint, who was still watching her with that unreadable expression. "I should get back. Mrs. Adkins will wonder where I've gone." She left before either man could respond, stepping back into the afternoon heat. Her heart was beating faster than it should be, and she didn't understand why. Flint Carter was just a rancher, just another man in a town full of men. There was no reason for her pulse to quicken, for her skin to feel too warm. No reason except that he'd looked at her, really looked at her, bruises and all, and hadn't flinched, hadn't looked away. Hadn't seen something broken that needed fixing or pitying or ignoring. He'd just seen her. Mara shook her head, dismissing the thought. She didn't have time for whatever that was. She had siblings to save and a future to build. Everything else was distraction. She walked back to the parsonage and spent the rest of the afternoon helping Mrs. Adkins prepare dinner, learning the kitchen's layout, familiarizing herself with where things were kept. The work was familiar. She'd cooked for her family since she was 8, but the context was different. Here, Mrs. Adkins worked beside her, chatting about town gossip and church business, treating Mara like a colleague rather than a servant. That night, lying in her borrowed bed, Mara thought about her siblings, wondered if they'd had dinner, wondered if her father had blamed them for her departure, if her mother had taken out her frustrations on Tommy or the twins or little Beth. The thought made her chest ache. She pressed her hand over her heart, as if she could physically hold the pain inside, keep it from spilling out. "I'm coming," she whispered to the dark. "Just give me time. I'm coming." The days blurred together after that. Mara threw herself into work with a ferocity that surprised even Mrs. Adkins. She was up before dawn, cooking breakfast and tending the church garden. She scrubbed floors until they gleamed, washed windows until they sparkled, mended clothes and linens with stitches so small they were nearly invisible. She helped prepare for Sunday services, setting out hymnals and polishing the brass candlesticks. She cooked meals for the pastor and his wife, for the occasional traveler seeking shelter, for anyone who needed feeding. And she saved every penny of her wages, hiding them in a small cloth bag she kept under her mattress. $3 a week, $12 a month. In 6 months, she'd have $72. Surely that would be enough to rent a small house, to buy basic supplies, to give her siblings a place to live while she figured out how to make a life for all of them. 6 months. It felt like forever. It felt like no time at all. 3 weeks after her arrival, Mara was hanging laundry in the parsonage yard when she heard the wagon. She looked up to see Flint Carter pulling his horse to a stop in front of the church, a load of lumber in the wagon bed behind him. Pastor Adkins emerged from the church, wiping sawdust from his hands. "Right on time, Flint. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten." "Never forgotten a delivery in my life," Flint said, climbing down from the wagon. He caught sight of Mara and nodded. "Miss Mara." "Mr. Carter," she replied, returning to her work, but she was aware of him as he and the pastor began unloading the lumber, aware of his movements in her peripheral vision, aware of the low rumble of his voice as he spoke. "This should be enough for the new pews," the pastor was saying. "The old ones are about to collapse. Last Sunday, Mrs. Henderson went right through the seat. Took 3 of us to pull her out." Flint's laugh was unexpected, a low, genuine sound that transformed his usually severe expression. "I heard about that. Half the county heard about it, the way she was carrying on." "She has a right to carry on. She bruised her dignity along with her backside." The pastor chuckled. "But these will be better, sturdier. Should last another 50 years, God willing." They worked in companionable silence for a while, carrying lumber into the church. Mara finished hanging the laundry and was about to go inside when Flint emerged again, alone this time. He paused when he saw her, seemed to wrestle with something, then walked over. "Miss Mara," he said, "can I ask you something?" She tensed, waiting for questions about her past, her family, the bruises that were finally starting to fade. "Of course. The pastor mentioned you're a hard worker, that you know your way around a kitchen and a garden." "I do my best." "I'm looking for someone to help at the ranch." He spoke carefully, as if choosing each word with precision. "My housekeeper quit last month. Said the work was too hard, the place too isolated. I've been managing on my own, but—" He gestured vaguely. "There's only so many hours in a day, and I'm not much of a cook." Mara's mind raced. Ranch work would probably pay more than the church. More money meant less time before she could go back for her siblings. But it also meant being alone with a man she barely knew, in a place miles from town, with no one to hear if something went wrong. She must have hesitated too long, because Flint added quickly, "It would be proper. Separate quarters, separate entrance. My father lives on the property in a cabin about 50 yards from the main house. You'd never be truly alone. And the pay would be better, $5 a week instead of 3. $5. That would cut her timeline nearly in half." "I'd need to talk to the Adkins," she said slowly. "Of course, I wouldn't expect you to leave them without proper notice." He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "Think about it. There's no rush." But there was a rush. Every day that passed was another day her siblings spent in that shack, another day they went hungry or scared or hurt. Every day was one too many. "I'll think about it," Mara said. Flint nodded, settled his hat more firmly on his head, and returned to his wagon. Mara watched him drive away, the lumber delivery complete, and felt the weight of another decision pressing down on her shoulders. That evening, she approached Mrs. Adkins as the older woman was preparing dinner. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "Of course, child." "Mr. Carter, the younger Mr. Carter, offered me work at his ranch. He says it would pay more." Mara kept her voice level, matter of fact. "But I wanted to know what you thought before I decided anything." Mrs. Adkins set down the knife she'd been using to chop vegetables and turned to face Mara fully. "What did I think about Flint Carter, or what I'd think about you leaving?" "Both, I suppose." The older woman was quiet for a moment, considering. "Flint Carter is one of the most honest men I've ever met. He doesn't lie, doesn't cheat, doesn't go back on his word. He works harder than 3 men combined, and he's built that ranch from nothing into something impressive. He's also—" She paused. "He's lonely, I think. His mother died when he was young. His father's a good man, but not much for company. Flint spent most of his life working, and I don't think he's learned how to do much else." "Is he dangerous?" "To cattle rustlers and men who beat their horses, yes. To a young woman who works for him? No. I'd stake my life on that." Mrs. Adkins smiled sadly. "As for you leaving, I won't lie, Mara. I'd miss you. You've been a blessing these past weeks, but I also see how you work, how you save every penny, how you look east toward wherever you came from with such longing in your eyes. You're here, but you're not really here. Part of you is somewhere else, with someone else. And if working for Flint gets you to wherever you need to be faster, then you should do it." Mara felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Ranch work is hard, harder than church work. And isolated. You'll be alone most days except for Flint and his father. No church gatherings, no town gossip, just land and sky and work. Some people find that peaceful. Others find it drives them mad." "I've been alone most of my life," Mara said quietly. "I'm not afraid of it." Mrs. Adkins reached out and squeezed her hand. "Then tell him yes, but promise me you'll come visit. And if anything goes wrong, anything at all, you come straight back here. We'll always have a place for you." Mara promised, though she knew she'd never come back if things went wrong. She'd figure it out the way she'd always figured it out. Because the alternative, giving up, admitting defeat, wasn't an option. The next Sunday, after services, Mara found Flint standing by his wagon, hat in hands, looking uncomfortable in his church clothes. "Mr. Carter," she said, "about your offer. If it's still open, I accept." Relief washed over his face. "It's open. When can you start?" "As soon as you need me." "Tomorrow?" Mara thought of her small bag of savings, of the 4 faces she carried in her heart. Tomorrow's perfect. And so, on a Monday morning in late August, Mara packed her few possessions into a borrowed satchel, said goodbye to the Adkins, and climbed into Flint Carter's wagon for the 3-mile ride to the ranch that would become the second chapter of her new life. The landscape changed as they left town. Fewer buildings, more open space, the land rolling in gentle swells toward distant hills. Flint didn't talk much during the ride, and Mara was grateful for the silence. She watched the land pass, tried not to think about what she was doing, tried not to second-guess a decision she'd already made. The Carter Ranch appeared gradually, like something emerging from a dream. First the fence line, well-maintained and straight. Then the pastures, where cattle grazed in clusters, their coats gleaming in the sun. Then the buildings, a barn that looked sturdy enough to weather any storm, a bunkhouse for ranch hands, a small cabin that must belong to Flint's father, and finally the main house itself. It was larger than Mara had expected, 2 stories of weathered wood with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. The windows were clean, the roof solid, the whole structure radiating an air of permanence that the shack she'd grown up in had never possessed. Flint pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down, then offered his hand to help Mara descend. She took it briefly, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip, before stepping away. "This is it," he said, gesturing to encompass the ranch. "Not much to look at, but it's home." "It's beautiful," Mara said, and meant it. Flint looked surprised, like beauty wasn't a word he associated with his property. "I'll show you where you'll be staying." He led her around the side of the house to a smaller structure she hadn't noticed before, a 1-room addition with its own door and a small window looking out over the pasture. "Built this last year," Flint explained, pushing the door open. "Thought about hiring more hands, but never got around to it. Should work fine for you." The room was simple but clean. A bed, a dresser, a washstand, a small stove for heat. Larger than the room at the parsonage, with more privacy. Mara could already imagine herself here, working during the day, returning at night to count her savings and think about the future. "It's perfect," she said. "Good." Flint set her satchel on the bed. "You get settled. I'll show you the kitchen in an hour or so, go over what needs doing. If you need anything, just—" He gestured vaguely. "I'm usually around somewhere." He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Alone, Mara unpacked her few possessions, the borrowed clothes, her nightgown, the cloth bag containing her savings, and a ribbon that had belonged to little Beth, the only thing Mara had managed to grab before her father threw her out. She held the ribbon to her chest, let herself feel the ache of missing them, then carefully put it away in the dresser. "Not forever," she whispered. "Just for now." An hour later, Flint gave her a tour of the house. The kitchen was large and well-equipped, though clearly maintained by someone who used it out of necessity rather than love. The pantry was stocked with basics: flour, beans, coffee, salt pork, enough to feed working men, but nothing fancy. The rest of the house was much the same, functional, clean, but sparse. No decorations, no photographs, no signs that this was anything more than a place to sleep between long days of work. "I'm usually up before dawn," Flint said. "I'll need breakfast ready by then. Dinner at sunset. Lunch I can manage on my own, just leave something I can carry." He paused. "I'm not particular about what you cook. Anything hot and filling will do." "What about your father?" "He takes his meals in his cabin mostly. Says he likes the quiet, but he'll come to the main house sometimes. I'll let you know when." They stood in the kitchen, an awkward silence stretching between them. Finally, Flint cleared his throat. "Look, I know this isn't easy, coming to work for someone you barely know, in a place you've never been. But I want you to know you're safe here. I don't tolerate meanness or cruelty of any kind, not to animals, not to people. If anyone bothers you, any of the ranch hands, anyone at all, you tell me. Understood?" Mara met his eyes and saw something there she hadn't expected. Sincerity. Maybe even kindness. "Understood," she said. "Good." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. You don't have to tell me where those bruises came from or why you flinch sometimes when people move too fast. Your past is your business. But if you ever need help, the kind of help that involves someone getting their face rearranged, you let me know. Sometimes problems need solving with more than words." Before Mara could respond, he was gone, the screen door banging shut behind him. She stood alone in the kitchen of her new home and felt something shift inside her. Not hope. She didn't dare hope. Not yet. But maybe the first small seed of something that could grow into hope, given time and care and the right conditions. Maybe. That first week at the Carter Ranch, Mara learned the rhythms of ranch life. Up before dawn to start the stove and prepare breakfast, usually eggs, bacon, biscuits, and coffee, strong enough to strip paint. Flint would appear exactly at sunrise, eat quickly and efficiently, thank her with a nod, and disappear until sunset. During the day, she cleaned the house, tended the vegetable garden, prepared dinner, and tried not to think about how empty the hours felt without her siblings to care for. The loneliness was harder than she'd expected. At the parsonage, there had been Mrs. Adkins to talk to, visitors to feed, church business to attend to. Here, there was only silence and work, and the vast Texas sky pressing down on everything. On Friday of that first week, as Mara was hanging laundry, she heard footsteps behind her. "Miss Mara." She turned to find an older man approaching, William Carter, Flint's father. Up close, she could see the family resemblance, the same dark eyes, the same strong jaw, though softened by age and silver hair. "Mr. Carter," she said, "can I help you with something? Just wanted to introduce myself properly. Didn't get a chance when you came by the store." He smiled. "My son tells me you're doing fine work here. Says the house hasn't been this clean in years." "I do my best." "I can see that." He glanced at the laundry. Shirts and work pants hung with military precision. "You've got a good hand with chores. Reminds me of my late wife. She used to say a house tells you everything you need to know about the people who live in it." Mara wasn't sure how to respond to that, so she just nodded. William Carter was quiet for a moment, studying her with the same assessing gaze his son used. Then he said, "My boy doesn't talk much, never has. But he's a good man, Miss Mara, the best I know. And if he offered you work here, it's because he saw something in you worth trusting." "I appreciate that, sir. Just wanted you to know, you need anything at all. My cabin's right over there." He pointed to the small structure across the yard. "And I mean anything, company, conversation, help. This ranch can be a lonely place if you're not used to it." "I'll keep that in mind, thank you." He tipped his hat and ambled away, leaving Mara alone with her laundry and her thoughts. That evening, as she was preparing dinner, Flint came in earlier than usual, his clothes dusty and his face lined with exhaustion. "Fence broke in the north pasture," he said. "Lost half the day fixing it. Dinner ready?" "Almost." He washed his hands at the pump outside, then sat at the kitchen table watching her work. The attention made Mara nervous, though she tried not to show it. "My father came by today," Flint said after a while. "He did? What'd he want?" "Just to introduce himself, to make sure I was settling in." Flint nodded, accepting this. Then, unexpectedly, he said, "You're doing good work here, Mara. Better than I expected. The house looks better, the food's better, everything's—" He paused, searching for words. "Better." It was the most he'd said to her all week. Mara felt an odd warmth in her chest. "Thank you," she said. "I'm glad it's working out." "Me too." They ate dinner in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. More comfortable. Less like two strangers occupying the same space, and more like— Mara cut the thought off before it could fully form. She didn't have time for whatever that was. She had a job to do, money to save, siblings to rescue. Everything else was just noise. But later, lying in her small room, listening to the coyotes howl in the distance, she found herself thinking about Flint Carter anyway. about the way he'd looked at her in the kitchen like she was something more than hired help, about his offer to rearrange someone's face if they bothered her, about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, not all men were like her father. It was a dangerous thought, but Mara held it close anyway, a small light in the darkness, as she drifted off to sleep. The weeks turned to months with a speed that both comforted and terrified Mara. October brought cooler nights and the first hints of frost on the grass. November arrived with winds that rattled the windows and made the cattle bunch together for warmth. By December, Mara had been at the Carter Ranch for 4 months, and her savings bag under the mattress had grown heavy with promise. She counted the money every night, $68 now, enough to rent a small place in town for several months, enough to buy basic supplies and food. Not enough to stop working, not enough to guarantee they'd survive, but enough to make her move, enough to go back. The thought filled her with equal parts hope and dread. She'd waited so long, worked so hard, saved every penny. But what if her father refused to let them go? What if he'd moved, taken the children somewhere Mara couldn't find them? What if, and this was the fear that woke her in the dead of night, heart pounding, what if they'd forgotten her? 4 months was a lifetime to a child. Beth had been 4 when Mara left. She'd be almost 5 now. Would she even remember her oldest sister's face? "You're thinking too loud." Mara jumped, nearly dropping the plate she was washing. She turned to find Flint standing in the kitchen doorway, his hat in his hands, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. "I'm sorry," she said. "Did you need something?" "Just came in for water." He moved to the pump, filled a cup, drank it down. But he didn't leave afterward. Instead, he leaned against the counter and studied her with that direct gaze she'd grown accustomed to over the months. "You've been distracted lately. More than usual." Mara turned back to the dishes, scrubbing harder than necessary. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You barely eat. You work yourself half to death. And sometimes I catch you staring east with a look on your face like you're seeing ghosts." He paused. "Or maybe people who might as well be ghosts." Her hands stilled in the soapy water. She'd been so careful, so guarded. How had he seen through her? "It's not your concern," she said quietly. "Maybe not. But I'm concerned anyway." Flint set his cup down. "Look, I know you've got reasons for being here. Reasons for saving every penny, for working like you're trying to outrun something. I'm not asking you to tell me what they are, but I am saying if you need help, you've got it. No questions asked." Mara's throat tightened. She'd spent so long alone, so long believing she had to carry everything herself, that the offer of help felt almost painful. "Why?" she asked, still not looking at him. "Why would you help me?" "Because someone should." The simplicity of the answer undid something in her. She turned to face him, her hands dripping soap and water, and for the first time since arriving at the Carter Ranch, she let him see past her careful walls. "I have siblings," she said. 4 of them. I left them with people who don't deserve to be called parents, people who hurt them, people who—" Her voice cracked. "I've been saving to go back for them, to bring them here or somewhere, anywhere that isn't there. But I don't know if I have enough money. I don't know if it'll work. I don't know anything except that I have to try." Flint was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Where are they?" "About 30 miles east. A farm past the county line. But I can't just take them. Their parents, my parents—" She stumbled over the word. "They won't let them go willingly. And the law, it says parents have rights, even parents who don't deserve them." "The law says a lot of things. Doesn't mean they're right." Flint crossed his arms. "How old are they, your siblings?" "Tommy's 8. The twins, Sarah and Samuel, they're 6 now. And Beth—" Mara's voice softened. "Beth just turned 5. She doesn't talk. Hasn't since they locked her in the cellar." Something dark and dangerous flickered across Flint's face. "They locked a 3-year-old in a cellar?" She cried too much. They said she needed to learn to be quiet. Mara wiped her hands on her apron, trying to steady herself. "I used to protect them. Used to take the beatings meant for them, make sure they got fed, even if I went hungry. But then I left, and now I don't know who's protecting them. I don't know if anyone is." "How much more do you think you need before you can go back?" Mara did the math in her head, the same calculation she'd done 100 times. "Another month's wages should do it. $75, maybe $80 total. Enough for rent and supplies until I can find more work. Enough to prove I can take care of them. Flint nodded slowly, his jaw tight. And if your parents refuse, if they try to keep them, then I'll figure something out. I always do. But even as she said it, Mara heard the uncertainty in her own voice. She'd been surviving on determination and stubbornness for so long, but determination didn't feed children. Stubbornness didn't keep them warm. I want to help, Flint said. You are helping. This job, the wages. I mean more than that. When you go back, you shouldn't go alone. And when you bring them here, because you will bring them here, Mara, one way or another, they'll need a place to stay. A safe place. Mara stared at him. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. He held her gaze, unflinching. This ranch is big enough for 4 more kids. Hell, it's big enough for 40. And my father, he'd love having children around again. Lost his only grandkids when my sister's family moved to California 5 years back. He mentions it at least once a week. But the ranch hands, the neighbors, what would people think? I don't much care what people think. Never have. Flint's voice was firm. What I care about is doing what's right. And leaving 4 kids with people who hurt them isn't right. Not by any measure. Tears pricked Mara's eyes. She'd held herself together for so long, had been so strong, so careful. But Flint's kindness, offered without conditions or expectations, threatened to break her. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this for strangers? Because I know what it's like, Flint said quietly. To be helpless. To need someone to step in, and they don't. He looked away, his jaw working. My mother, she died when I was 12. Took sick one winter and just never got better. My father tried everything, but we were too far from town, too isolated. By the time we got her to a doctor, it was too late. He paused. I used to wonder if things would have been different if someone had helped sooner. If someone had stepped in when she first took sick, offered medicine or supplies or just something. But everyone was too busy with their own problems. So she died and my father grieved, and I learned that if you want something done in this world, you do it yourself because no one else will. I'm sorry, Mara said. Don't be sorry. Just let me help. Let me be the someone who steps in. He met her eyes again. You've got 4 weeks until Christmas. That gives us time to plan. Time to figure out the best way to get those kids out of there and somewhere safe. And if your parents want to make trouble, well, his expression hardened. They can try. Mara wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle it alone the way she'd handled everything else. But looking at Flint, seeing the determination in his face, the sincerity in his eyes, she realized something crucial. Accepting help wasn't weakness. Sometimes it was the strongest thing you could do. Okay, she said. Okay, we do it together. Flint nodded once, satisfied. Good. Now finish those dishes and get some sleep. We'll talk more tomorrow. He left, taking his cup with him, leaving Mara alone with the lamplight and her racing thoughts. For the first time in months, the future felt less like a hopeless dream and more like something solid, something possible, something real. The next morning, Mara woke to find a package on her doorstep. Inside was a heavy wool coat lined with sheepskin, warm enough for the coldest Texas winter. A note in Flint's angular handwriting read simply, "You'll need this where we're going." She held the coat close, feeling its weight, its warmth. Then she folded it carefully and set it aside, returning to her work with renewed purpose. 4 more weeks, and she'd see her siblings again. 4 more weeks, and she'd finally be able to keep her promise. December crept forward with agonizing slowness. Mara worked harder than ever, driven by nervous energy she couldn't quite contain. She cleaned rooms that were already clean, cooked elaborate meals that Flint ate with his usual efficient silence, reorganized the pantry twice. Anything to keep her hands busy, her mind occupied, her fears at bay. On the second Sunday of December, Flint loaded her into the wagon after breakfast. "Where are we going?" Mara asked. "Town. You need supplies for the trip." "I have supplies." "Not good enough ones." He urged the horses forward. "Besides, my father wants to meet you properly. Asked me to bring you for Sunday dinner." Mara's stomach clenched. She'd spoken to William Carter a few times over the months, brief exchanges in the yard or when he came to the main house for coffee. But a formal dinner felt different, more significant somehow. "What should I say?" she asked. "About the children? About why we're—" "Tell him the truth. He'll want to help same as me." Flint glanced at her. "My father's a good man, Mara. Best one I know. If he knows kids are in trouble, he'll move heaven and earth to fix it." They rode in comfortable silence after that, the kind of quiet that had developed between them over the months. Mara had learned that Flint wasn't much for unnecessary words, but his silences said plenty. This one said, "Trust me." William Carter's cabin was small but well kept, with a stone chimney and windows that caught the morning sun. The older man opened the door before they'd even climbed down from the wagon, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "There she is, the mystery woman who's got my boy acting like a human being instead of a work mule." He ushered them inside. Come in. I've got stew on the stove and bread in the oven." The cabin's interior was cozy, filled with handmade furniture and the lingering scent of pipe tobacco. Photographs lined the mantel. A young woman who must have been Flint's mother, wedding pictures, children at various ages. Sit, William Carter commanded, gesturing to the table. "Flint, pour the coffee. Miss Mara, tell me how you're finding ranch life. My son treating you well?" "Very well, sir." "Good. He learned his manners from his mother. I'm just the one who taught him which end of a cow to milk." The older man busied himself ladling stew into bowls. "Flint tells me you've got a situation that needs addressing." Mara glanced at Flint, who nodded encouragingly. "I have siblings," she began, and then the whole story poured out. The abuse, the escape, the months of saving, the plan to go back. William Carter listened without interruption, his expression growing darker as she spoke. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he set down his spoon with deliberate care. "Those children are coming here," he said. It wasn't a question. "That's the plan, sir. If we can—" "Not if. When." William Carter's eyes were hard now, the same darkness Mara had seen in his son's face. "You go back for them. You bring them here, and if anyone tries to stop you, they answer to me, and to Flint, and to every decent person in this county who can't stomach the thought of children being hurt." "But legally," Mara started, "legally, those children are better off anywhere than with parents who beat them. And if the law disagrees, well," he exchanged a look with Flint. "The law's been wrong before. Doesn't mean we have to abide by it." "Pa," Flint said quietly, "we need to be smart about this." "I am being smart. Smart means getting those kids out before something worse happens. Smart means having a plan and the means to execute it." William Carter turned back to Mara. "You said you have money saved?" "Almost $70. "Good. That'll help. But you'll need more than money. You'll need witnesses. People who can testify that you're fit to care for these children, that you can provide for them. People whose word carries weight." He tapped the table. "The Adkins will vouch for you. So will I. So will half the congregation at that church, from what I hear." "I don't want to put anyone at risk," Mara protested. "Child, some things are worth the risk. Some things are worth fighting for." William Carter's voice softened. "My son told you about his mother. What he probably didn't tell you is that I blame myself for her death. Waited too long to get help, too proud to admit I couldn't handle it alone. And that stubbornness cost me the woman I loved." He reached across the table and patted Mara's hand. "Don't make the same mistake. Don't be too proud to accept help when it's offered. Those children need you, and you need us. It's that simple." Mara felt tears threaten again. She blinked them back, nodded. "Thank you," she managed. "Both of you." I can't." "Don't need to say anything," William Carter interrupted gently. "Just need to eat my stew before it gets cold. And then we'll plan. Because that's what families do. They plan, they work together, and they protect their own." The word family hung in the air between them. Mara had spent so long thinking of family as a trap, a cage, a name that only brought pain. But sitting in William Carter's cabin, eating his stew, watching him and Flint discuss logistics with the easy rhythm of two people who'd spent years working as a team, she realized family could mean something else entirely. Family could mean chosen, Could mean people who showed up when you needed them. Could mean a man who offered his ranch to 4 children he'd never met. And a father who backed his son's decision without hesitation. Could mean home. They spent the afternoon planning. William Carter suggested approaching the local sheriff first, explaining the situation, getting official support before making any moves. Flint argued for direct action. Ride out, get the kids, sort out the legalities after. Mara found herself caught between caution and desperation, wanting both to do this right and to do it now, immediately, before another day passed. In the end, they compromised. They'd make the trip in 1 week, the day before Christmas Eve. Flint and William Carter would go with Mara, along with Pastor Adkins as a witness. They'd approach Mara's parents directly, offer to take the children with parental consent. If consent was refused, they'd go to the sheriff. And if the sheriff couldn't or wouldn't help, then we take them anyway, William Carter said flatly, and we deal with the consequences. The week that followed was the longest of Mara's life. Every morning she woke thinking, 6 more days, then 5, then 4. She packed and repacked a bag with clothes for the children, items she'd been secretly purchasing over the months. Warm coats, sturdy boots, blankets. She cooked enough food to last the journey and then some. She cleaned the house obsessively, as if making everything perfect could somehow guarantee success. Flint watched her with concern, but said nothing. He'd learned when to push and when to give her space. But on the night before they were set to leave, he found her sitting on the porch steps, staring east into the darkness. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Can't stop thinking." Mara pulled her new coat tighter. "What if they're not there? What if something's happened? What if you drive yourself crazy with worry before we even leave?" Flint sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "They're going to be fine, Mara. We're going to get them, bring them back here, and give them the life they deserve. You have to believe that." "I'm trying to. Try harder." He bumped her shoulder gently. "You've come this far. Don't lose faith now." They sat in silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Closer, the cattle lowed softly in their sleep. The ranch settled around them like a living thing, breathing its nighttime rhythms. "Thank you," Mara said finally, "for everything, for believing me, for helping me, for—" She gestured helplessly. "For being you." Flint was quiet for so long that Mara thought he wouldn't respond. Then he said, "My mother used to tell me that good people don't stand by when others are hurting, that silence in the face of cruelty makes you just as guilty as the ones doing the hurting. I didn't understand what she meant until she was gone, and I realized how many people had stood by while she suffered." He looked at Mara. "I won't stand by anymore. Not for you. Not for those kids. Not for anyone." "That's why you took me in," Mara said, understanding flooding through her. "Why you offered work when you didn't really need help. You saw the bruises and you knew." "I saw someone trying to survive. Seemed like the least I could do was make that survival a little easier." He stood, offered his hand. "Come on, you need sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Mara took his hand, let him pull her to her feet, but she didn't let go right away. Instead, she held on, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers, the steadiness of him. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said, "I want you to know that this—" She squeezed his hand. "This means everything." Flint squeezed back. "Then let's make sure it counts." They parted at her door, and Mara lay in bed for hours afterward, too wired to sleep. She thought about Tommy, about whether he'd grown taller, about whether he still had that serious expression he'd worn like armor. She thought about Sarah and Samuel, about their gap-toothed smiles, and the way they'd finish each other's sentences. She thought about Beth, about her silence, about all the words locked inside a little girl too afraid to speak. And she thought about Flint, about his quiet strength and his unexpected kindness, about the way he'd looked at her on the porch, like she was someone worth protecting, someone worth fighting for. She fell asleep just before dawn and dreamed of a house filled with children's laughter, of a table surrounded by small bodies and full plates, of a life where love was measured not in blood, but in showing up, day after day, through every hardship. She dreamed of home. The morning broke cold and clear, frost painting the grass silver. Mara dressed carefully in her warmest clothes, the new coat Flint had given her, and boots sturdy enough for hard traveling. She braided her hair tightly, securing it with Beth's ribbon, the one piece of her past life she'd kept. For luck, she told herself. For courage. William Carter arrived at the main house just after sunrise, driving a larger wagon than the one Flint usually used. Pastor Adkins sat beside him, looking solemn but determined. "Morning, Miss Mara," the pastor said. "Ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be." Flint emerged from the barn leading his horse, saddled and prepared. "I'll ride ahead. Make sure the road's clear. You three follow in the wagon." They set out as the sun climbed higher, painting the frozen landscape in shades of gold and amber. Mara sat in the wagon bed, watching the ranch disappear behind them, watching the familiar landscape give way to territory she hadn't seen in 4 months. Every mile brought her closer to her siblings and closer to the confrontation she both needed and dreaded. Pastor Adkins and William Carter talked quietly in the front, discussing strategy and contingencies. Mara half listened, her attention focused on the horizon, on the landscape that would eventually become familiar again, that would lead her back to the collapsing shack and the 4 people she'd left behind. Flint rode ahead but circled back periodically, checking on them, making sure they were keeping good time. Each time he approached, Mara felt something in her chest ease slightly. She wasn't alone. She'd never be alone again, not the way she'd been before. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat the food Mara had packed. Cold biscuits, dried meat, apples that were starting to soften. Simple fare, but no one complained. "We should reach your parents' place around sunset," William Carter said, consulting a map he'd brought. "Assuming the roads stay clear and we don't run into weather." "What's our approach?" Pastor Adkins asked. "Do we go in strong or do we try diplomacy first?" "Diplomacy," Mara said firmly. "My father, he's mean when he's drunk, which is most of the time. But he's also a coward. If he sees 4 adults, people who look like they have authority, he might back down. Might let us take the children without a fight." "And if he doesn't?" Flint asked. "Then we take them anyway." Mara's voice was steady. "No matter what it takes." They continued on through the afternoon, the landscape growing more familiar with every mile. Mara recognized landmarks, a crooked tree split by lightning, a creek that ran dry most summers, a fence line that marked the boundary between counties. Each one brought her closer to a past she'd tried to escape and a future she was determined to create. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and red, William Carter pulled the wagon to a stop. "There," he said, pointing. Mara followed his gesture and saw it. The shack. Still standing, though it looked even more precarious than she remembered, like a strong wind could knock it flat. Smoke rose from the chimney, thin and gray. Someone was home. "That's it?" Flint's voice was carefully neutral, but Mara heard the anger underneath. "That's where you grew up?" "That's where I survived," Mara corrected. She climbed down from the wagon, her legs shaky from hours of sitting and from the adrenaline now flooding her system. "Let me go first. Let me talk to them." "Absolutely not," Flint said. "We go together, or we don't go at all." "He's right," William Carter added. "You're not facing them alone. That's the whole point of us being here." Mara wanted to argue, but looking at their faces, at the determination in Flint's eyes, the protective set to William Carter's jaw, the quiet support in Pastor Adkins' expression, she realized they weren't going to budge. "Together then," she said. "But let me do the talking, at least at first." They approached the shack as a group, Mara in front, the 3 men arrayed behind her like guardians. The door was closed, but she could hear voices inside, her father's rough laugh, her mother's sharp response, and underneath, barely audible, the sound of children. Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. She raised her hand and knocked. The voices inside went silent. Footsteps approached. The door swung open, and there stood her father, older and meaner than she remembered, his face ruddy with drink, his eyes narrow and suspicious. "What do you—" He stopped when he saw her. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by rage. "You." "Me," Mara agreed. Her voice didn't shake. She didn't let it. "I've come for the children." Her father's laugh was ugly. The hell you have. Get off my property. Robert? Her mother's voice came from inside. Who is it? It's your bastard daughter, that's who. Come back to cause more trouble. Eleanor Lane appeared behind her husband, her face pinched and bitter as ever. She looked at Mara, then at the men behind her, and something like calculation crossed her expression. Well, she said, look who finally remembered she had family. Took you long enough. I never forgot, Mara said. Not for a single day. And now I'm here to take my siblings somewhere safe, somewhere they'll be fed and clothed and cared for the way they deserve. Your siblings? Her father's voice rose. They're my children, my property, and you're not taking them anywhere. Actually, Pastor Adkins stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying authority. Legally, Miss Mara has the right to petition for custody if she can prove you're unfit parents. Unfit? Eleanor Lane's laugh was sharp. We're the ones who fed them, clothed them, kept a roof over their heads while this ungrateful bitch ran off to God knows where. You're the ones who beat them, Mara said, her voice still steady despite the fury building in her chest. Who starved them? Who locked a 3-year-old in a cellar for crying? That's a lie, her father roared. Is it? Flint's voice cut through the argument like a blade. Then you won't mind if we come in and see them, see for ourselves how well they're being treated. Robert Lane's hand moved to his belt, where Mara knew he kept a knife. But Flint was already moving, his own hand on his gun, his expression making it very clear what would happen if her father tried anything. You're trespassing, her father said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Skits, get off my land. Your land? William Carter's laugh was harsh. Boy, you don't own this property. Check the county records myself. You're squatting on abandoned land, same as any vagrant, so don't talk to us about property rights when you don't have any yourself. The color drained from her father's face. You can't. I can, and I did. William Carter pulled a folded paper from his coat. This is a writ from Judge Morrison. It gives Miss Mara temporary custody of her siblings pending a full hearing. You can comply peacefully, or we can get the sheriff involved. Your choice. It was a bluff. Mara knew it was a bluff. There hadn't been time to get a writ to involve judges and sheriffs. But her parents didn't know that. They saw the paper, saw the 4 adults standing united, and something in them wavered. Mara? The voice was small, barely audible, but Mara would have recognized it anywhere. She looked past her parents and saw Tommy standing in the doorway, thin as a rail, his eyes huge in his gaunt face. Mara, is that really you? It's me, she said, her voice breaking. I came back, Tommy, just like I promised. I came back for you. Behind Tommy, the twins appeared, clinging to each other, and behind them, so small Mara almost missed her, was Beth. Still silent, still scared, still waiting. Kids, get back inside, Eleanor Lane snapped. But Tommy didn't move. He looked at Mara, at the men behind her, and something like hope dawned in his expression. Are you taking us away? He asked. Are we leaving? Yes, Mara said. She stepped forward, past her father, past her mother's grasping hands. You're coming with me, all of you, right now. Her father grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. The hell they are! Flint moved faster than Mara thought possible. One moment her father had hold of her, the next he was on the ground, Flint's boot on his chest, Flint's gun pointed at his head. Touch her again, Flint said quietly, and you'll regret it. Now, the lady asked nicely. She came here with legal documents and witnesses, but if you want to make this difficult, we can do it that way too. Your call. Robert Lane stared up at Flint, at the cold fury in his eyes, and whatever fight was left in him died. Take them, he spat. Take the little bastards. See how long you last feeding 4 more mouths. See how long before you're begging us to take them back. We won't be, Mara said. She moved past him into the shack, into the fetid darkness she'd escaped 4 months ago. It looked smaller somehow, more pathetic. How had they all fit in here? How had they survived? The children stood huddled together, exactly as she'd left them. Tommy still trying to be brave. The twins still clinging to each other. Beth still silent, still small, still scared. It's okay, Mara said softly. I'm here now. I'm taking you somewhere safe, somewhere warm, somewhere no one will hurt you ever again. Tommy broke first. He ran to her, threw his arms around her waist, and started crying in great heaving sobs. Mara held Tommy tight, feeling how thin he'd become, counting each rib beneath her hands. The twins rushed forward next, Sarah sobbing into Mara's skirt, while Samuel wrapped himself around her leg. Only Beth remained frozen in the corner, her eyes wide and uncertain, like she'd forgotten how to hope. "Beth," Mara whispered, kneeling down so she was at eye level with the little girl. "Beth, sweetheart, it's me. It's Mara. I came back for you." Beth's lower lip trembled. For a moment, Mara thought she might speak, might break the silence that had held her captive for so long. Instead, she simply lifted her arms in the universal gesture of a child wanting to be held. Mara gathered her up, feeling how light she was, how fragile. Beth buried her face in Mara's neck and held on like she was drowning, and Mara was the only thing keeping her afloat. "Get what you need," Mara said to Tommy, to the twins, to all of them. "Clothes, anything important, we're leaving, right now." "We don't got much," Tommy said, wiping his eyes. "Pa sold most everything worth keeping." "Then just yourselves. That's all that matters." Mara stood, Beth still clinging to her, and turned to find her mother blocking the doorway. Eleanor Lane's face was a mask of bitterness and something that might have been regret if Mara didn't know better. "You think you're saving them," she said, "but you're just condemning them to a different kind of misery. You can't take care of 4 children? You're 19 years old with no husband, no family, no prospects. They'll starve with you just like they would have starved here." "The difference," Mara said quietly, "is that with me, they'll know they're loved. With me, they'll go to sleep without fear. With me, they'll matter." She met her mother's eyes. "That's something you never gave any of us. Not once." Eleanor Lane's face twisted. For a moment, Mara thought her mother might say something, might offer some defense or explanation or even apology. Instead, she stepped aside. "Go then. All of you. You were never mine anyway. None of you were." Mara pushed past her, the children following like ducklings, out into the yard where Flint still held her father at gunpoint. Robert Lane looked smaller somehow, diminished without his fists and his rage to make him seem larger than life. "That's all of them?" William Carter asked gently. "That's all of them," Mara confirmed. Pastor Adkins had already opened the wagon bed, arranging blankets to make the ride more comfortable. He helped the twins up first, then Tommy, while Mara carefully set Beth down and climbed in herself before pulling the little girl back into her lap. "Wait." Her father's voice was thick with something that might have been shame if he'd been capable of it. "Wait, just the boy. Leave me the boy. I need help with the property, with the work. You can take the others, but leave Tommy." Mara felt Tommy stiffen against her. She wrapped her free arm around him, holding both him and Beth now, both of them trembling. "No," she said simply. "He's my son." "He was your punching bag." Flint's voice was cold as January ice. "And if you ever come near these children again, if you ever even think about them, I'll make sure you regret it. We clear?" Robert Lane opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Whatever he saw in Flint's face convinced him that arguing would be a very bad idea. He slumped back against the ground, defeated. William Carter took the reins and urged the horses forward. The wagon rolled away from the shack, away from years of pain and hunger and fear, toward something uncertain but infinitely better. Mara held the children close and didn't look back. Not once. Some things deserve to be left behind, to fade into memory and then beyond memory into nothingness. They rode in silence for the first mile. The children were too shocked, too overwhelmed to speak. Mara just held them, counted their heartbeats, reassured herself that they were real and whole and finally safe. It was Tommy who broke the silence first. "Mara, where are we going?" "To a ranch. A place called the Carter Ranch, about 30 miles from here. There's a house with enough rooms for all of us, and food and warmth, and 2 good men who want to help us." "Why?" Samuel asked, his voice small and suspicious. "Why would they help us? We're nobody." "Because they're good people," Mara said. "Because sometimes in this world, when you're lucky enough to find good people, they help just because they can, just because it's right." "Will they hurt us?" Sarah whispered. The question broke Mara's heart. No, sweetheart. Never. I promise you, no one will ever hurt you again. Not while I'm alive. Flint had ridden ahead again, scouting the road, but he circled back now and matched pace with the wagon. He looked at the children properly for the first time, his expression softening in a way Mara had never seen before. You kids hungry? He asked. 4 heads nodded in unison. Good. When we stop for the night, we'll make a proper meal. My pa there, he gestured to William Carter. He makes the best stew you've ever tasted. And Miss Mara's been cooking at our place for months. She can make biscuits that'll melt in your mouth. Really? Tommy asked, hope and disbelief warring in his voice. Really? And tomorrow, when we get to the ranch, you can eat as much as you want. Can sleep in real beds. Can run around without worrying about... He stopped himself, glanced at Mara. Without worrying about anything. Beth stirred in Mara's arms, lifting her head to look at Flint. She studied him with those huge, solemn eyes, then pointed at his horse. You want to see the horse? Flint asked gently. Beth nodded. Well, once we stop for the night, I'll introduce you properly. His name's Ash, and he's about the sweetest tempered animal you'll ever meet. Lets children climb all over him like he's a jungle gym. He smiled. You'll like him. Beth almost smiled back. Almost. Then she tucked herself against Mara again, content with the promise of future introductions. They traveled until sunset, stopping at a clearing Pastor Adkins knew about, one with a creek for water and enough shelter to block the worst of the wind. William Carter and Flint set up camp with practiced efficiency, building a fire, hanging a pot for stew, laying out bedrolls in a semicircle around the flames. Mara helped the children wash in the creek, using clean water and soap she'd brought from the ranch. She combed the tangles from their hair, examined them for injuries or illness, cataloged every bruise and scar and sign of neglect. Tommy had a badly healed break in his left pinky finger. Sarah had a burn mark on her forearm that looked months old. Samuel's teeth were rotting from lack of care. And Beth was so thin that Mara could see every bone in her small body. We'll fix it, Mara promised them as she helped them into the clean clothes she'd brought. We'll fix all of it. You'll see doctors. You'll eat real food. You'll get strong again. What if they make us go back? Tommy asked, the fear raw in his voice. What if the law says we have to? Then we'll fight the law. Mara pulled him close. I won't let you go back, Tommy. I won't let any of you go back. Even if I have to take you so far away that no one can find us, I'll do it. Whatever it takes to keep you safe. By the time they returned to camp, William Carter had stew bubbling over the fire and fresh bread warming on stones near the flames. The smell alone made the children's eyes go wide. Sit, the old man commanded, gesturing to logs he'd arranged as makeshift benches. Eat. Don't be shy about it either. There's plenty, and if we run out, I'll make more. He wasn't lying. The stew was thick with meat and vegetables, seasoned with herbs that made Mara's mouth water. The bread was crusty on the outside, soft within, perfect for soaking up the broth. The children ate like they were starving, which Mara supposed they were. They ate until their bellies were round, until they couldn't manage another bite, until they started to look sleepy and content. Pastor Adkins produced a harmonica from his coat pocket and played soft, meandering tunes while the fire crackled and popped. William Carter told stories about his youth, about adventures Mara suspected were half embellished but entertaining nonetheless. Flint sat slightly apart, whittling something from a piece of wood, his hands moving with practiced grace. Mara watched her siblings slowly relax, slowly begin to believe that maybe this was real, that maybe they really were safe. Samuel actually laughed at one of William Carter's jokes. Sarah asked if she could try playing the harmonica. Tommy sat close to Mara, but not quite touching, like he was giving himself permission to stop being the guardian, to be a child again. And Beth watched everything with those serious eyes, taking it all in, processing this new reality where people were kind and food was abundant, and no one raised their voice or their fists. When the children's eyes started to droop, Mara tucked them into the bedrolls William Carter had prepared. She lay between them, one arm around Beth, the other stretched to touch Tommy's shoulder, creating a protective circle with her body the way she'd done 100 times before in that awful shack. Sleep, she whispered. I'm here. I'll keep watch. Promise? Tommy murmured, already half asleep. Promise. One by one, they drifted off, exhausted by the day's emotions and the first full meal they'd had in who knew how long. Mara waited until their breathing evened out, until she was certain they were truly asleep, before carefully extracting herself and joining the men by the fire. "They're good kids," William Carter said softly. "You can see it in their eyes. Despite everything, they're still good kids." "They deserve better than what they've had," Mara said. "They're getting it now." Flint set aside his whittling, a small wooden horse Mara saw, probably for Beth. "We'll make sure of it." Pastor Adkins cleared his throat. "I need to ask, Miss Mara, what happens when we get back to Claymore? Your parents could make trouble. They could petition the court, claim you kidnapped their children." "Let them try," William Carter said. "I've got friends, Judge Morrison, Sheriff Hayes, half the business owners in town. We'll make sure those children stay exactly where they belong." "But is friendship enough?" Pastor Adkins pressed. "In the eyes of the law, blood relations typically prevail. Unless," he paused significantly, "unless Miss Mara can prove she has the means and the stability to care for them. A proper home, an income, respectability. She has all that," Flint said. "She works for me, lives on my property, has steady wages and a roof over her head." "But she's an unmarried woman, Flint. The court might see that as—" Pastor Adkins chose his words carefully. "Inappropriate. A young woman living alone on a bachelor's ranch, caring for children with no legal relationship to her." The implication hung heavy in the air. Mara felt her face heat. "What are you suggesting?" she asked. Pastor Adkins spread his hands. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm simply stating the reality of how these things work. If you want to guarantee those children stay with you, you need to establish yourself as their legal guardian, and the easiest way to do that is to demonstrate stability. Family. A traditional household." "You mean marriage," Flint said flatly. "I mean, whatever arrangement best serves those children's interests." Silence fell around the fire. Mara stared at the flames, her mind racing. Marriage, to Flint. It was absurd. They barely knew each other. She'd been working for him for 4 months, yes, but they'd spoken maybe a dozen real conversations in all that time. He was her employer, her what? Her friend? Her protector? The man who'd dropped everything to help rescue 4 children he'd never met? The man who'd pointed a gun at her father to keep her safe? The man who was currently carving toys for her siblings by firelight? "It's a lot to consider," Pastor Adkins said gently. "I'm not pressuring anyone. I'm just presenting options. There may be other ways to secure custody, but marriage would certainly make the legal case simpler." "Excuse me," Mara said abruptly. She stood and walked away from the fire, toward the creek, needing space to think, to breathe, to process what had just been suggested. She heard footsteps behind her a few minutes later. Flint's tread was distinctive, solid, unhurried, steady. "I'm not asking you to marry me," he said without preamble. "Just so we're clear, if the pastor's suggestion made you uncomfortable, I apologize. He means well, but he doesn't always think before speaking." Mara turned to face him. In the moonlight, his features were softened, less severe. "But would it work? Would marriage really make that much difference in the eyes of the law?" "Probably. A married couple has stronger legal standing than a single woman, especially a married couple with property and income and community ties." Flint shoved his hands in his pockets. "But that's not a reason to get married, Mara. Marriage should mean something more than legal convenience." "Should it?" The question came out more bitter than Mara intended. "I've never seen a marriage that meant anything good. My parents hated each other. My mother once told me she'd have left my father if she'd had anywhere else to go. Every couple I knew growing up was either miserable together or miserable apart." "Not every marriage is like that," Flint said quietly. "My parents, they were happy, really happy. Used to drive me crazy when I was young, the way they'd laugh at each other's jokes, the way my father would dance with my mother in the kitchen while she was cooking. I thought all marriages were like that until I grew up and realized theirs was rare. What made it work? Friendship, I think. They liked each other, genuinely liked each other, not just loved. They talked, worked together, respected each other's strengths, and forgave each other's weaknesses." He looked at Mara. "It wasn't perfect. They fought sometimes, but they always came back to center, always chose each other. Mara turned back to the creek, watching moonlight dance on the water. I can't marry you, Flint. It wouldn't be fair to you. You deserve someone who what? Who actually wants to marry me instead of doing it out of necessity? He moved to stand beside her. Maybe, but I also deserve to make my own choices about what I'm willing to do and why. And if marrying you means 4 kids get to grow up safe and loved, well, I can think of worse reasons to get married. But what about you? What about what you want? What I want, Flint said carefully, is to do the right thing. And the right thing is making sure those children have every possible advantage, every possible protection. If that means a marriage of convenience, then that's what it means. Convenience? Mara tested the word. Is that what we'd be calling it? Unless you'd rather call it something else. She thought about the past 4 months, about learning the rhythms of his household, the routines of his work, about the comfortable silences that had developed between them, the moments of unexpected humor, the quiet understanding that had grown without either of them acknowledging it, about how safe she felt on his property, how he'd never once made her feel like anything other than a valued employee, and gradually, something approaching a friend. If I said yes, she began slowly, what would it actually look like? This marriage of convenience. However you wanted it to look, we'd do the legal ceremony, sign the papers, make it official in the eyes of the court. You and the kids would move into the main house. There's plenty of room. We'd present ourselves as a family to anyone who asked. Beyond that, he shrugged. We'd work it out as we went. No expectations, no pressure. Just 2 people trying to build something good for 4 kids who need it. And what happens if one of us wants something different later? Wants a real marriage or wants out entirely? Then we deal with it honestly, like adults. Flint met her eyes. I'm not asking you to love me, Mara. I'm not even asking you to like me particularly. I'm just asking if you trust me enough to let me help you protect those children. Did she trust him? Mara turned the question over in her mind, examining it from every angle. Trust wasn't something she gave easily, couldn't afford to give easily, not after a childhood that had taught her that the people who should protect you were often the ones who hurt you most. But Flint had never hurt her, had never raised his voice or his hand, had offered work when she needed it, respect when she expected pity, help when she'd been too proud to ask for it, had ridden 30 miles and pointed a gun at her father to help rescue 4 children he'd never met. I trust you, she said finally, more than I've ever trusted anyone. Then marry me. He said it simply, like he was asking her to pass the salt. Marry me and let's give those kids the stable home they deserve. Mara looked back toward the campfire, toward the sleeping forms of her siblings, toward the future she'd been fighting so hard to build. Marriage hadn't been part of her plan, hadn't even been a consideration. But then, nothing about the past 4 months had gone according to plan. Sometimes you had to improvise. Sometimes you had to take the help that was offered, even if it came in an unexpected form. Okay, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Flint nodded, like they'd just agreed on a business transaction rather than a lifelong commitment. Good. We'll do it as soon as we get back to Claymore. Pastor Adkins can perform the ceremony at the church. Keep it simple and legal. Very romantic, Mara said dryly. He actually smiled. Romance is overrated. Partnership is what matters. They stood together in the moonlight, 2 people on the edge of a decision that would change everything, and Mara felt something shift in her chest. Not love, it was far too soon for that, and she wasn't sure she even knew what love looked like. But maybe the beginning of something. Maybe the first tentative roots of the kind of friendship Flint had described, the kind his parents had built a marriage on. Maybe that would be enough. They returned to the fire to find Pastor Adkins and William Carter pretending they hadn't been watching the entire interaction. Well? William Carter asked. We're getting married, Flint said. Soon as we get back to town. William Carter's face split into a grin. About damn time. I was beginning to think you'd never find someone willing to put up with your moods. I have moods? Flint asked mildly. You have exactly one mood. Grumpy. Fortunately, Miss Mara seems capable of handling it. The old man stood and clapped his son on the shoulder. Congratulations, boy. Your mother would have liked her. I know, Flint said quietly. She would have. Pastor Adkins cleared his throat. If we're doing this, we should do it properly. I'll need to file the marriage license with the county, make sure everything's legal and binding. That way, when you petition for custody of the children, you'll have documentation showing you can provide a stable two-parent household. How long will that take? Mara asked. If we do it right away? A few days for the paperwork. The ceremony itself can be as simple or elaborate as you want. Given the circumstances, I'd suggest simple. No need to turn this into a spectacle. Agreed, Mara said. She looked at Flint. Simple works for me. Me too. They made plans around the fire. Who would witness the ceremony, what needed to be done legally, how to present the marriage to the community in a way that wouldn't invite gossip or suspicion. William Carter suggested a small gathering at the ranch after the wedding, just close friends and neighbors, to establish Mara and Flint as a couple in people's minds. The more normal it looks, he said, the less likely anyone is to question it. And if your parents do show up trying to claim the children, they'll be facing not just you and Flint, but the whole community backing you up. It was sound strategy, even if it made Mara's head spin. Just this morning, she'd been single and focused solely on rescuing her siblings. Now she was engaged, planning a wedding, strategizing about custody battles. Life, she was learning, rarely moved at the pace you expected. They settled in for the night, the men taking first watch in shifts while Mara stayed with the children. She lay awake long after the others slept, staring up at the stars, trying to make sense of everything that had happened in the space of a single day. She'd gotten her siblings back. Against all odds, against her parents' resistance, she'd actually done it. They were here, safe, sleeping peacefully for the first time in months. That alone should have been enough to fill her with joy. But she was also getting married, to a man she respected and trusted but didn't love. To secure a future for her siblings, yes, but also if she was honest with herself, because the idea of facing the future alone terrified her. She'd been alone for so long, carrying so much weight on her shoulders, that the thought of having a partner, even a partner in name only, felt like being offered water after years in the desert. Was that enough? Was partnership without love enough to build a life on? Mara didn't have an answer, but lying there under the stars, her siblings breathing softly around her, the promise of a new life waiting just a day's travel away, she thought maybe it could be. Maybe love was overrated, like Flint said. Maybe what mattered was showing up, doing the work, choosing each other day after day, not because of passion or romance, but because it was right. Maybe that was its own kind of love. She fell asleep with that thought and dreamed of a house filled with children's laughter, of a table surrounded by family, of a man with dark eyes and steady hands building something good out of broken pieces. She dreamed of home. The next day dawned clear and cold. They broke camp quickly, everyone eager to complete the journey. The children were quieter this morning, the reality of their changed circumstances starting to sink in. Tommy kept glancing back the way they'd come, like he expected their father to appear on the horizon, like he couldn't quite believe they'd really gotten away. He's not coming, Mara assured him. We're safe now. But what if he does? What if he finds us? Then Mr. Carter and I will handle it. Mara pulled Tommy close. You don't have to be afraid anymore, Tommy. You don't have to be the one protecting everyone. You can just be a boy again. Tommy's eyes filled with tears. I don't remember how. Then you'll learn. We all will. Mara kissed the top of his head. Together. The journey back to the Carter Ranch took most of the day. They stopped twice to rest the horses and let the children stretch their legs. At the second stop, Flint made good on his promise to introduce Beth to his horse. He lifted the little girl up so she could pet Ash's nose, talking to her in a gentle voice Mara had never heard him use before. See? Soft as velvet. And if you're real quiet, you can hear him breathing. Sounds like wind through tall grass, doesn't it? Beth nodded solemnly, her small hand stroking the horse's muzzle. Then, so quietly Mara almost missed it, she whispered, Pretty. Everyone froze. It was the first word Beth had spoken in almost 2 years. The first sound beyond crying or the occasional whimper. The first sign that maybe, just maybe, the silence could be broken. Flint didn't make a big deal of it. He just smiled and said, He is pretty, isn't he? You've got a good eye for horses, Miss Beth. Beth smiled back, a real genuine smile that transformed her small face, and Mara had to turn away to hide her tears. They were safe. They were really, truly safe. And maybe, given time and care and love, they could even begin to heal. The Carter Ranch appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent, the buildings painted gold in the afternoon light. William Carter pointed it out to the children. "There it is, your new home. What do you think?" "It's big," Samuel said, awed. "Big enough for all of us," Flint confirmed, "with room to spare. You kids can pick your own rooms once we get settled." "Our own rooms?" Sarah asked. "Really? Really? Though you're welcome to share if you'd rather. Some people like having company." The twins immediately started planning how they'd arrange their shared room, what they'd put where, whether they could have curtains and maybe a rug. Tommy stayed quiet, still wary, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. And Beth just held tight to Mara, taking it all in with those serious eyes. They pulled up to the main house as dusk was falling. William Carter helped the children down while Flint saw to the horses. Mara stood in the yard, looking at the house that would soon legally be her home, and felt the weight of it settle over her shoulders. This was real. This was happening. In a few days, she'd be married, would be a wife, a guardian, a permanent resident of this place, would be building a life here, not just passing through on her way to somewhere else. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "Come on," William Carter said, ushering the children toward the door. "Let's get you settled. I'll bet you're all hungry again." "We're always hungry," Tommy admitted. "Then we'll have to do something about that, won't we?" Inside, the house felt different with children in it. The silence that had defined it for so long gave way to small sounds, footsteps on the stairs, whispered conversations, the tentative exploration of people learning a new space. William Carter led them through each room, pointing out where things were kept, telling them to make themselves at home. The children moved like ghosts at first, afraid to touch anything, afraid to take up space. It was Tommy who finally asked the question they were all thinking. "Is this really ours? We can really stay here?" "For as long as you need," Mara said. "This is home now." "But what if we break something? What if we make a mess?" William Carter knelt down so he was eye level with Tommy. "Son, houses are meant to be lived in. Things get broken, messes get made. That's just life. What matters is that you're here, that you're safe, that you know you belong." He straightened. "Now, I'm going to make the biggest dinner you've ever seen. Miss Mara, why don't you show these children where they'll be sleeping?" Mara led them upstairs where 4 bedrooms waited. The twins chose to share the smallest room, delighted by the twin beds and the window that looked out over the pasture. Tommy took the room next to theirs, still playing guardian even here. And Beth wouldn't let go of Mara's hand, wouldn't consider sleeping anywhere except next to her. "It's okay," Mara said, lifting the little girl up. "You can stay with me until you're ready for your own room, however long that takes." They went back downstairs to find Flint building up the fire in the main room, while William Carter crashed around in the kitchen. The smell of cooking meat and baking bread filled the house, warm and welcoming. The children gravitated toward the fire, holding their hands out to the flames, soaking in the heat. Dinner that night was a celebration of sorts. William Carter had outdone himself: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes with butter, fresh vegetables, biscuits that were still warm from the oven, and a pie made from preserved apples. The children ate until they were full, then kept eating because the food was there, and some part of them still couldn't believe it would be there tomorrow. "Slow down," Mara said gently. "There's plenty. You don't have to eat it all at once." "But what if there's not enough tomorrow?" Samuel asked. "There will be. There will be enough tomorrow and the day after and every day after that. I promise you." Mara looked at Flint, who nodded confirmation. "We run a working ranch," he said. "We've got cattle, chickens, a vegetable garden, and a full pantry. You won't go hungry here, ever." The twins exchanged looks, something like hope dawning in their expressions. Tommy remained skeptical, but he was 8 years old and had learned the hard way that adult promises often meant nothing. It would take time to convince him. Time and consistency and proof that this was different from everything he'd known before. After dinner, William Carter produced a checkers set and taught the twins to play while Tommy watched with grudging interest. Beth fell asleep in Mara's lap, exhausted by the day's emotions. Flint sat in the corner working on his whittling, but Mara noticed he kept glancing at the children, something soft in his expression that hadn't been there before. Later, after the children were in bed and the house had settled into nighttime quiet, Flint found Mara on the porch. She'd slipped out for air after tucking everyone in, needing a moment to process everything that had happened. "They're good kids," he said, leaning against the railing beside her. "They are. Or they will be, once they learn they don't have to be afraid anymore. That'll take time." "I know." Mara pulled her coat tighter. "Time and patience and more stability than I know how to give them." "You won't be doing it alone," Flint reminded her. "That's the whole point of this arrangement, remember?" "I know, I just—" She struggled to find words. "I don't want to mess this up. They've been through so much already. They deserve better than what I can give them. They deserve exactly what you're giving them, someone who loves them enough to fight for them. That's more than most kids get." He was quiet for a moment. "My mother used to say that love isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up, day after day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. You've already proven you can do that." "Have I?" "I left them for 4 months. To save them. There's a difference." Flint turned to face her. "Stop punishing yourself for doing what you had to do. You got them out. That's what matters." Mara wanted to believe him, wanted to let go of the guilt that had been her constant companion since the night she'd walked away from that shack. But guilt was a hard habit to break. "When do you want to do this?" she asked, changing the subject. "The wedding." "Soon as possible. Tomorrow I'll ride into town, talk to Pastor Adkins about the paperwork. We can probably have it done by the end of the week." "That fast?" "The faster we make it legal, the faster those kids are protected." He met her eyes. "Unless you're having second thoughts?" "No. No second thoughts." Mara took a breath. "Just nervousness, I guess. I never thought I'd get married. Never wanted to after watching my parents." "This isn't like that," Flint said firmly. "This is a partnership, a choice we're both making with clear eyes and honest intentions. No lies, no cruelty, no—" He gestured vaguely. "Whatever poison your parents had." "Partnership," Mara repeated. "I can work with that." "Good. Because that's all this needs to be." He pushed off the railing. "I'll let you finish your thinking, but don't stay out too long. It's getting cold." He left, and Mara stood alone under the stars, thinking about the life she was choosing, the future she was building. It wasn't the future she'd imagined, wasn't romantic or passionate or any of the things songs and stories claimed love should be, but maybe it was something better, something more solid, something that could weather storms and hard times and still stand strong. Maybe that was enough. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Flint rode to town and returned with news that the marriage license was being processed, that Pastor Adkins could perform the ceremony on Saturday, that the whole town was buzzing with gossip about the Carter boy finally settling down. "I told them the truth," Flint said, "that you came to work for me, that we grew to respect each other, that we decided to make a life together. People will believe what they want to believe, but at least we're not lying. And the children? Told them you had younger siblings who needed caring for, that taking them in was part of the deal. Folks seemed to accept that well enough. Mrs. Henderson even said it was good of us, giving orphans a home." He paused. "I didn't correct her about the orphan part. Thank you." Meanwhile, Mara focused on settling the children into their new life. She established routines: breakfast at sunrise, lessons in the afternoon, chores appropriate to their ages, dinner as a family every night. The structure seemed to help, gave them something to anchor to in a world that had shifted so dramatically. Tommy was assigned to help with the chickens, feeding them and collecting eggs. The twins worked in the vegetable garden, learning to identify plants and pull weeds. Even Beth had tasks: setting the table, folding napkins, small things that made her feel useful without overwhelming her. William Carter took to grandparenting with enthusiasm. He taught Tommy to ride, letting the boy sit in front of him on his old mare. He told the twins stories about Texas history while they worked in the garden. He carved animals for Beth, a whole menagerie of horses and cattle, and even a tiny chicken that made her smile every time she looked at it. "You're good with them," Mara told him one afternoon. "Had practice with my own kids back in the day, and I always wanted more grandchildren around. My daughter's boys are out in California. See them maybe once a year if we're lucky. Nice to have young ones close by again." He glanced at her. "You're doing good work with them, Miss Mara. They're starting to look like children instead of frightened rabbits." It was true. Day by day, hour by hour, the children were transforming. Color returned to their cheeks. Their eyes grew brighter. They laughed more, spoke more freely, started to play instead of just surviving. Tommy's suspicious wariness began to ease. Sarah and Samuel invented elaborate games involving stick horses and imaginary cattle drives. And Beth started talking. Not much at first, just single words here and there. Yes and no, and please and thank you. But each word was a victory, a sign that the silence was breaking, that trust was being rebuilt. Saturday arrived too quickly and not quickly enough. Mara woke before dawn, nerves singing through her body. Today she would marry Flint Carter, would become Mara Carter, would legally bind herself to a man she'd known for less than 6 months, would commit to a partnership that would define the rest of her life. She dressed carefully in the one good dress she owned, the brown one Mrs. Adkins had given her, which seemed like a lifetime ago now. She braided her hair and pinned it up, trying to look like someone who belonged in a church, someone who deserved to make vows before God and witnesses. The children were excited about the wedding, even if they didn't fully understand what it meant. The twins had picked wildflowers from the pasture. Tommy had asked if this meant Flint would be their brother now. Beth just held Mara's hand and looked solemn, like she understood this was important, even if the details were unclear. They rode to town in the wagon, all 6 of them crowded together, William Carter handling the reins. Flint rode ahead on Ash, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday suit, but not complaining. The church came into view, its white steeple bright against the blue winter sky. Inside, a small group had gathered, Mrs. Adkins, beaming with pride. The sheriff, there to serve as official witness. A handful of ranchers and townspeople who'd known Flint all his life and wanted to see him married. The general store owner. The blacksmith. People whose names Mara was still learning, but whose presence meant acceptance, meant belonging. Pastor Adkins stood at the altar, his Bible open, his expression warm. "Are we ready?" Mara looked at Flint, who'd taken his place beside her. He met her eyes and nodded once. "Ready." The ceremony was simple, just as they'd planned. Traditional vows exchanged in steady voices. A ring. Flint's mother's ring, William Carter revealed, pressing it into his son's hand with tears in his eyes. The pronouncement of marriage, a kiss that was brief and chaste, more formal than romantic, sealing a contract more than celebrating passion. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Pastor Adkins said. "May God bless this union and the family you're building together." The witnesses applauded. Mrs. Adkins cried. The children looked confused but happy, sensing this was good even if they didn't quite grasp the implications. And Mara felt something settle in her chest. Not love, not yet, but commitment, determination, the solid weight of a choice made and a future accepted. She was Mara Carter now. For better or worse, she belonged to this name, this family, this life. The gathering afterward at the ranch was louder, more celebratory. William Carter had recruited half the county's women to help prepare food, and the result was a feast that covered every surface in the house. There was music, someone had brought a fiddle, someone else a guitar. There was dancing, though Mara and Flint mostly watched, neither of them comfortable with public displays. The children, however, had no such reservations. Tommy learned a square dance from Mrs. Henderson. The twins spun each other around until they were dizzy and laughing. And Beth actually danced with William Carter, her small feet balanced on his boots as he moved them around the floor, patient and gentle. "They're happy," Flint observed, watching from the edge of the room. "They are," Mara agreed, "maybe for the first time in their lives." Then this was worth it, all of it. She looked at him, this man she'd just married, and realized he meant it. For him, this wasn't a sacrifice or even really a compromise. It was simply the right thing to do, executed with the same straightforward practicality he brought to everything else. "Thank you," she said, "for all of this. For them. For—" She gestured at the room, the people, the life they'd just committed to building. "Thank me by making it work," Flint said, By being happy, that's all the thanks I need. The party lasted until evening. Slowly, people drifted away, back to their own ranches, their own lives, their own families. The house settled into quiet again, but it was a different quiet than before. Fuller somehow. Warmer. The quiet of a home rather than just a house. Mara tucked the children into bed, exhausted and content. She kissed each of them good night, promised tomorrow would be just as good as today, reassured them that yes, this was real, yes, they were staying, yes, everything was going to be okay. She found Flint in the main room, banking the fire for the night. He'd removed his jacket and tie, looking more like himself in just shirt sleeves and work pants. "They're asleep," she reported. "Good. It's been a long day for them." He straightened, studying her. "For you too. You holding up?" "I think so. It still doesn't feel real." "Give it time. It will." They stood in awkward silence, two people who were now legally bound but still learning how to be in each other's space. Finally, Flint cleared his throat. "About sleeping arrangements. I meant what I said before. No expectations, no pressure. The master bedroom is yours. I'll take the spare room down the hall." "That's your room," Mara protested. "Your father built this house. You grew up here. I can't." "You can, and you will. You need to be close to the children, especially Beth, and they need to see this as a real marriage, not just—" He searched for words. "A legal arrangement. So we present it as real. You take the main room, I take the spare, and in public we're a married couple building a life together." It made sense, even if it felt strange. "And in private?" "In private, we're partners figuring it out as we go." He moved toward the stairs. "Get some rest, Mara. Tomorrow's another day and those kids will be up at dawn wanting breakfast." He was right. Mara climbed the stairs to the master bedroom. Her bedroom now, though it felt presumptuous to claim it. The room was larger than anywhere she'd ever slept, with a real bed and a dresser and a window seat that looked out over the ranch. Someone, probably Mrs. Adkins, had put fresh flowers on the nightstand. Mara changed into her nightgown and slipped under the covers, feeling the weight of the day finally catching up with her. She was married. The children were safe. They had a home, a future, a chance at something better. It was everything she'd fought for, everything she'd dreamed of during those long months of saving and planning and hoping. So why did she feel so uncertain? Maybe because she'd spent so long focused on survival that she'd forgotten to think about what came after. Forgotten to consider that surviving wasn't the same as living, that getting the children to safety was just the first step in a much longer journey. Now she had to figure out how to actually live. How to be a wife, even if it was a partnership rather than a romance. How to be a mother to children who weren't legally hers. How to build a family out of broken pieces and shared determination. How to be Mara Carter instead of just Mara, the girl with no name. She fell asleep with those questions circling in her mind and dreamed of futures both terrifying and full of promise. The next morning, Sunday, Mara woke to find Beth had crawled into bed with her sometime during the night. The little girl was curled against her side, thumb in mouth, sleeping with the deep peace of a child who finally felt safe. Mara held her close and let herself feel the gratitude of it, that Beth could sleep without nightmares, could rest without fear, could trust enough to seek comfort. Downstairs, she found Flint already making coffee, his hair still damp from washing. "Morning," he said. "Sleep okay?" "Better than I expected. You?" "Well enough." He poured her a cup of coffee. "Thought we might take the kids into town for church. Let people see us as a family. Solidify the image." "Good idea." Mara accepted the coffee gratefully. "And after, what's the plan?" "After we start living. We establish routines, we work the ranch, we raise those kids, we build a life." He said it like it was simple, like building a life was just another task to accomplish. Maybe for him it was. They did go to church that morning, all 6 of them filing into a pew together while the congregation whispered and stared. Pastor Adkins acknowledged them during announcements, welcoming Mara officially into the community, congratulating the Carters on their marriage and their expanded family. People smiled. A few looked skeptical. But mostly they seemed accepting, willing to give this unusual arrangement the benefit of the doubt. After the service, several women approached Mara with offers of help. Mrs. Henderson wanted to teach the girls to sew. The school teacher mentioned that Tommy would be starting classes after the new year. Someone else offered hand-me-down clothes their own children had outgrown. Small gestures, but they added up to something larger. Acceptance, community, the sense that they belonged here. That afternoon, back at the ranch, a wagon appeared on the road. Mara felt her heart stop. What if it was her parents? What if they'd come to challenge the marriage, to demand the children back, to destroy everything they'd built? But as the wagon drew closer, she saw it wasn't her parents. It was a man she didn't recognize, dressed in city clothes, carrying a leather satchel. "Mr. Carter," the man called. "Flint Carter?" "That's me." Flint moved to intercept him, one hand resting on his gun belt. "What can I do for you?" "Name's Mitchell. I'm a clerk with the county court. I'm here about a custody matter regarding 4 minor children." He glanced at Mara. "You must be Mrs. Carter?" "I am." Mitchell pulled papers from his satchel. "I have here a petition filed by Robert and Eleanor Lane, claiming their 4 children were taken unlawfully and demanding their immediate return. The court has scheduled a hearing for next month to determine custody." Mara felt the ground shift under her feet. She'd known this was coming, had known her parents wouldn't give up without a fight, but hearing it made official, seeing it in legal documents, made it brutally real. "On what grounds?" Flint asked, his voice hard. "On grounds of parental rights, primarily. The Lanes claim their children were removed from their care without consent, without due process, and without legal justification. They're demanding the children be returned pending the hearing." "Absolutely not," William Carter said, appearing from the barn. "Those children are staying right here, where they're safe." "I understand your position, sir, but the law, Flint interrupted, also says children have the right to be free from abuse and neglect. The law says they deserve to be fed, clothed, and cared for. And the law says that married couples with means and community support have the right to seek custody of children being mistreated." Mitchell looked uncomfortable. "That's for the court to decide, Mr. Carter. I'm just here to serve notice and to verify that the children are, in fact, present at this address." "They're here," Mara said. "They're safe, they're healthy, and they're staying here." "Then you'll need to present your case at the hearing, bring evidence of mistreatment, proof that you can provide adequate care, testimony from witnesses who can speak to your character and the Lanes' unfitness as parents." Mitchell handed the papers to Flint. "The hearing is January 15th. Don't miss it." He climbed back into his wagon and left, taking with him the fragile piece Mara had been building. She stood in the yard, watching dust rise behind his wheels, feeling everything she'd fought for suddenly hanging in the balance. "We'll fight this," Flint said quietly. "We'll get every person in this county to testify if we have to. We'll show the court exactly what those children were living in, exactly what kind of people the Lanes are." "What if it's not enough?" Mara whispered. "What if the court sides with them anyway? What if blood really does trump everything else?" "Then we'll figure out something else." Flint took her hand, the first time he'd done so voluntarily since they'd exchanged rings. "I meant what I said in my vows, Mara. For better or worse. We're in this together now, and I don't quit. Ever." The weeks between Christmas and the hearing passed in a haze of preparation. Pastor Adkins helped them gather testimonies from everyone in Claymore who'd witnessed Mara's dedication, Flint's character, the children's transformation. The doctor who'd examined them documented the evidence of malnutrition and past abuse. Mrs. Adkins wrote a letter detailing Mara's time at the parsonage, her work ethic, her kindness. Even the school teacher, who'd only known Tommy for 2 weeks, testified to how eager he was to learn, how much he'd blossomed with proper care. But the children themselves were the strongest evidence. Day by day, they grew healthier, happier, more confident. Their ribs stopped showing. Their eyes lost that hunted look. They laughed freely, played without fear, spoke without flinching. They were becoming the children they should have been all along. On the morning of January 15th, they rode to the county courthouse, all 6 of them together. The building was imposing. 3 stories of stone and iron, designed to intimidate. Inside, the courtroom was even worse. Dark wood and stern portraits of dead judges, everything arranged to emphasize the power of the law over the individual. Mara's parents were already there, looking smaller somehow outside their territory. Robert Lane had cleaned up, traded his usual filthy work clothes for a suit that didn't quite fit. Eleanor Lane wore a dress that might have been nice 20 years ago, her face arranged in an expression of maternal suffering that made Mara's stomach turn. They had a lawyer, some slick-talking man from the city who kept glancing at his pocket watch like he had better places to be. Mara and Flint had Pastor Adkins, William Carter, and the truth. She hoped it would be enough. The judge entered. A woman, which surprised Mara. Judge Morrison was in her 50s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She called the court to order and asked to hear the Lanes' petition first. Their lawyer stood and painted a picture of devoted parents whose children had been stolen in the night by a vindictive daughter with delusions of grandeur. He claimed the Lanes were simple farmers who'd fallen on hard times, that any perceived neglect was simply the result of poverty, rather than cruelty. He implied that Mara had ulterior motives, that she'd seduced a wealthy rancher and was using the children to secure her position. It was all lies, but it was lies told smoothly, professionally, by someone who understood how to work the system. Then it was their turn. Pastor Adkins spoke first, describing Mara's arrival in Claymore, her injuries, her determination to save money and return for her siblings. Mrs. Adkins followed, detailing the children's condition when they'd been retrieved, malnourished, frightened, bearing signs of physical abuse. The doctor presented his medical findings. William Carter testified to Flint's character and the suitability of the ranch as a home. The school teacher discussed Tommy's progress. One by one, the people of Claymore stood and told the truth about what they'd witnessed, what they believed, who deserved to raise these children. Finally, Judge Morrison called Mara to the stand. "Mrs. Carter," the judge said, "why should this court remove 4 children from their biological parents and place them in your care?" Mara took a breath, chose her words carefully. "Because biology doesn't make someone a parent, Your Honor. Love does. Showing up does. Putting their needs above your own convenience does. My parents," she gestured to the Lanes, "gave us life and then spent every day making us regret it. They beat us, starved us, told us we were worthless. When I tried to protect my siblings, they threw me out. When I came back for the children, my father tried to keep Tommy just so he'd have someone to abuse." "These are serious allegations," Judge Morrison said. "Can you prove them?" "The doctor's report proves the physical neglect. My siblings can testify to the treatment we received, and I can show you this." Mara stood and turned, pulling her dress down to expose her back. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Her back was a map of scars, old ones from belt buckles and switches, newer ones from her father's final beating, evidence written on her skin that couldn't be disputed or explained away. "These are what love looks like to the Lanes," Mara said quietly. "This is what they call parenting. And I won't let them do this to my siblings. Not anymore." The courtroom was silent when she sat down. Even the Lanes' lawyer looked uncomfortable. Eleanor Lane was crying, big, performative tears that fooled no one. Robert Lane stared at the floor, his face red with either shame or rage. Judge Morrison called for a recess. They waited in agony for 2 hours while she reviewed the evidence and testimony. When she returned, her expression was unreadable. "I've considered everything presented today," she began. "The law traditionally favors biological parents. The law presumes that children belong with those who gave them life. But the law also recognizes that parental rights are not absolute, that they can be forfeited through abuse, neglect, or failure to provide adequate care." Mara held her breath. "In this case, the evidence is overwhelming. The children in question show clear signs of prolonged malnutrition and physical abuse. Multiple credible witnesses attest to the deplorable conditions they were living in. Mrs. Carter's testimony, supported by medical evidence, demonstrates a pattern of cruelty that no child should endure." Judge Morrison looked directly at the Lanes. "Mr. and Mrs. Lane, you failed your children in every way that matters. You failed to protect them, to nurture them, to give them even the most basic care and dignity." Eleanor Lane started to protest, but the judge held up her hand. "I'm not finished. Mrs. Carter, Mara Carter, has demonstrated extraordinary courage and commitment. She worked for months to save money for her siblings' rescue. She married to provide them stability. She has the support of her community and the means to care for these children properly. In light of all this, I am granting full custody of Thomas, Sarah, Samuel, and Elizabeth Lane to Mr. and Mrs. Flint Carter, effective immediately." The courtroom erupted. Mara heard the words but couldn't quite process them. They'd won. The children were theirs, legally, officially, permanently theirs. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. "However," she continued, "I am also terminating the parental rights of Robert and Eleanor Lane. They are forbidden from contacting these children or coming within 100 yards of the Carter Ranch. Any violation will result in immediate arrest and prosecution." Robert Lane lunged from his seat, face purple with rage. "You can't do that. They're my children." "They were your children," Judge Morrison said coldly. "Now they're the Carters' children. And if you ever threaten this family again, Mr. Lane, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your life in prison. Are we clear?" The sheriff was already moving to restrain Robert Lane. Eleanor Lane just sat, crying her false tears, playing the victim until the end. Mara didn't care about their protests or their anger or their anything, because the children were safe. Really, truly, permanently safe. Outside the courthouse, Flint pulled her into an embrace, their first real one, spontaneous and full of relief. William Carter had tears streaming down his weathered face. Pastor Adkins was thanking God in a voice choked with emotion. And the children were dancing in the courthouse yard, spinning and laughing and free, understanding that something important had just happened, even if they didn't grasp all the details. "We won," Tommy said, looking up at Mara with wonder in his eyes. "We really won?" "We really won," Mara confirmed. "You're ours now, forever." "Forever," Beth repeated, the word clear and strong. Her third word, her best word, the one that promised everything they'd all been fighting for. The ride back to the ranch was jubilant. They stopped at the general store and bought candy for the children, something they'd never been allowed before. They stopped at the church so Pastor Adkins could ring the bells in celebration. They stopped at William Carter's cabin so he could pull out a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving for a special occasion. That night, they had a feast. William Carter cooked. Mrs. Adkins brought pies. Half the town showed up to celebrate with them, to welcome the children officially into the community, to witness the beginning of this unlikely family. Mara stood on the porch at sunset, watching her siblings play in the yard. Tommy was teaching the twins to rope a fence post. Beth was showing William Carter the wooden horse Flint had carved for her. The ranch hands were setting up for dancing, tuning instruments, laughing about something one of them had said. Flint found her there, handed her a cup of cider. "You did it," he said. "You got them back, kept them safe, built them a home." "We did it," Mara corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "Partners," Flint agreed. He raised his cup. "To partnership." "To partnership," Mara echoed. Then, surprising herself, she added, "And maybe, someday, to more than that." Flint looked at her, really looked at her, and smiled. "Yeah, maybe someday." It wasn't a declaration of love, wasn't a promise of romance or passion or any of the things poems claimed mattered most. But it was real. It was honest. It was two people acknowledging that they'd built something together, and maybe, given time and care, that something could grow into whatever they needed it to be. That spring, they started the school in the old barn, not just for their own children, but for every child in the county who needed it. Mara taught reading and writing and arithmetic. Flint taught practical skills, animal care, woodworking, basic ranching. William Carter told stories and taught history. And the children, their children, and others, learned not just lessons from books, but lessons about what family could mean, about how showing up mattered more than blood, about how love was a choice you made every single day. They hung a sign above the barn door, hand-carved by Flint. Carter School, where every child has a name. Because that's what mattered in the end. Not the name you were born with, not the blood in your veins, not the accidents of biology or circumstance. What mattered was being seen, being valued, being given a name you could carry with pride. One evening in late May, as Mara was closing up the school for the day, Flint appeared with something in his hand. A piece of paper, official-looking, with a seal stamped in red wax. "What's this?" she asked. "Adoption papers. Official ones. making you and me the legal parents of Tommy, Sarah, Samuel, and Beth. He held them out. Thought you might want to see your name next to theirs. Official-like. Mara took the papers with shaking hands. There it was in black and white. Thomas Carter, Sarah Carter, Samuel Carter, Elizabeth Carter, children of Flint and Mara Carter. No more Lane, no more connection to the people who'd hurt them. Just Carter, a name that meant protection and home and belonging. When did you arrange this? She asked. Been working on it since the custody hearing. Judge Morrison helped. Said she wanted to make sure there was no legal ambiguity, no way for the Lanes to ever challenge it again. Flint moved closer. They're ours, Mara. Completely, officially, permanently ours. She looked up at him, this man she'd married out of necessity who'd become something far more important. Partner, friend, co-parent, and maybe, gradually, the person she was learning to love. Not the dramatic, overwhelming love of stories, but something quieter and more enduring. The love that came from working side by side, from building a life together, from choosing each other day after day. Thank you, she said, for all of this, for everything. Thank yourself. You're the one who refused to give up, who fought for them when it would have been easier to walk away. He shrugged. I just did what anyone decent would do. No, Mara said firmly. You did what almost no one would do. You saw someone in need and you helped. Without conditions, without expectations, just because it was right. That's not common, Flint. That's extraordinary. He looked uncomfortable with the praise, the way he always did, but he also looked pleased, like maybe he was starting to understand his own worth, his own capacity for goodness. That night, after the children were asleep, Mara found Flint on the porch again. Their spot, she'd come to think of it, the place where they had their real conversations, where the partnership felt most like something more. I've been thinking, she said. That's usually dangerous. She smiled. I've been thinking about what you said the night before we got married, about your parents, about how they liked each other as much as loved each other, about how that made their marriage work. Yeah? I like you, Flint Carter. I respect you. I trust you. And I'm grateful every single day that you came into my life when you did. She paused. And I think maybe, without realizing it, I've been falling in love with you. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The kind that sneaks up on you while you're building a life together. Flint was silent for a long moment. Then he said, I think I've been falling in love with you too. Don't know when it started exactly. Maybe the first time I saw you standing guard over those kids. Maybe when you agreed to marry me to protect them. Maybe every day since then, watching you be strong and stubborn and kind even when everything was falling apart. He turned to face her. But I do know this. I'm glad you kept your promise to them. And I'm glad you ended up here, with me. Me too, Mara whispered. He kissed her then, properly this time, not the formal peck of their wedding, but something real and deep and full of promise. A kiss that acknowledged what they'd built, what they were building, what they could become together. When they pulled apart, Mara rested her head on his shoulder and looked out at the ranch, at the house full of sleeping children, at the barn that was now a school, at the land that had become home. She thought about the girl she'd been 7 months ago, beaten and desperate, walking through the night with no name and no future. She thought about the promise she'd made to her siblings, the determination that had carried her through months of fear and uncertainty. She thought about all the people who'd helped along the way, Mrs. Adkins, Pastor Adkins, William Carter, Flint himself. And she thought about the family she'd built, not the family she was born into, but the one she'd chosen, the one that had chosen her back. You know what I learned, she said softly. Blood doesn't make a family. Love does. Showing up does. Choosing each other day after day through the hard times and the good times. That's what makes a family. Sounds about right, Flint agreed. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. Somewhere a coyote howled. Closer, in the house behind them, one of the children, probably Beth, called out softly in her sleep, then settled again, comforted by the knowledge that someone would come if she needed them, that she was safe and loved and home. And Mara Carter, no longer just Mara, no longer nameless or belonging to nowhere, held her husband's hand and felt the full weight of everything they'd built together. a home, a family, a future full of possibility. The light they'd created, a found family, chosen names, and quiet, stubborn love, burned steady and bright. And this time, she knew with absolute certainty it would never go out.